meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council for Monday, August 5th, 2019. Council members, we have a quorum and can do the region's business. Council members, we have an agenda before us, but I'm going to ask that we please move item 8 up to being item 1 on the agenda to accommodate a couple of schedules for council members who have other commitments towards the end of the meeting. So without objection, I will make that change. Number 8 is now our item 1. And no other changes.
I would make a motion for that changed agenda, Mr. Chair.
And approval of the agenda as well, is that? Cool. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of July 15, 2019 of the regular meeting of the Community Development Committee. Is there a motion?
Move the minutes.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Great. Any discussion, additions, changes, corrections? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Moving on to the business items. Now our new number 1 is 2019-166 JT, a joint committee or the budget amendment for the second quarter. And Heather, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Again, Heather Augustin-Hebner, the Finance Director for MTS and CD. One of the things we're trying to work on in the budget area is to hit that sweet spot of enough details that everybody is comfortable with the budget items, but not too much detail where you feel like you're drowning in the details. So one of the asks I would just make of you is, after we do any of these budget presentations, if you have feedback about if I need to lift it up or drill down, let me know, and we'll just kind of get it refined, and we'll make sure that we eventually hit that right spot for everybody. So with that, the budget amendments are a routine part of our annual budget process, and we come to you approximately quarterly to adjust our operating and capital budgets. Our capital program has 3 major sections: the Authorized Capital Program, or the ACP, the capital budget, and the capital improvement plan. The ACP provides multi-year authorization to spend on project costs where funding has been secured and you, the council, has given final approval for us to proceed on a given project. The capital budget represents the amount of the ACP expected that we're going to spend on any given year. And the CIP is a 6-year capital investment plan. The CIP is approved by the council through our annual budgeting process. So you'll be seeing our CIP later this year. Projects in the CIP have had funding sources identified but not yet secured, and the council has not yet given final approval. So all the projects that you're going to see in our budget amendment have been in the approved CIP by the council. When and if there are any projects that have not been approved by the council in the CIP, we call those out very specifically for you. So we add projects, we remove projects, and we change projects by coming through the council. So with this specific item today, we propose to close completed projects and bring in new funds to pass through to regional parks implementing agencies. New funds include $19.8 million in Parks and Trail legacy funds appropriated in this legislative session and $1.3 million in regional bonds. Legacy funds for the Metropolitan Regional Park System are distributed to the agencies according to a formula set in Minnesota statute. By law, 10% of each year's appropriation is set aside for land acquisition, and the remaining 90% is distributed by a formula that can be found in your business item. Data elements required to complete the legacy allocation formula were finalized in mid-July. This amendment contains the final allocation amounts by agency represented by the projects titled unallocated funds. So you'll see projects Ramsey County, unallocated funds, Three Rivers Park District, unallocated funds. Bringing in the state fiscal year 20 legacy formula dollars into our capital budget now as unallocated projects demonstrates our commitment to supporting regional partners and meeting their frequent requests of us to pass through funding as quickly as we are able given our processes and procedures. All state and council required reviews and controls are maintained through this process. Council staff are actively working with parks agencies to finalize which projects will be funded with the state fiscal year 20 legacy dollars. A master list of projects to be funded with both state fiscal year 20 and 21 legacy dollars were developed following state statute and council policy. These projects have been reviewed and recommended by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission and approved by the council on October 24th, 2018. You will see final project selections in the administrative amendment section of a future budget amendment. So essentially what we've got here is we get dollars. We get half in one fiscal year, half in another. We have one master list of projects, and the agencies right now are in the process of figuring out of this master list of projects that have been reviewed by MPOSC and gone through the council, basically the order that they're going to fund the projects in. There might also be minor dollar adjustments. If it's anything that is not a minor dollar adjustment, that comes through council. If a parks implementing agency wants to do a new project that hasn't already gone through this review process, we're not going to issue a grant agreement. That project would go back through MPOSC, reviewed through MPOSC, and come back through the council again. I also want to note that 100% of the funding in this budget amendment is going to the parks implementing agencies. So a good example of how this works is you'll see in most of the budget amendments, you're going to see a section called administrative adjustments. You're going to see one of those. There's a number of administrative adjustments in this budget amendment. So what happened is we had some state bond dollars that we brought in, but we weren't sure is exactly which projects or which order the projects the parks implementing agencies wanted to fund. So we bring in that dollar amount so that those agencies don't have to wait for us, because we know that all of those projects have already been approved by the council and MPOSC. They've gone through all of the review processes. And then as those agencies are ready to start working on those projects, we bring them in terms of administrative adjustment. So there's all the projects have been vetted. It's just kind of a quirk to make sure that our administrative processes aren't holding back some of the projects that the parks implementing agencies want to do. Because if you'll notice our schedule, sometimes we may go 5 or 6 months in this council without doing a budget amendment, and that means that park implementing agencies or on the transit side, suburban transit providers would be in a position of having to wait for us 5 or 6 months before we had a council budget amendment go through. One of the things that we will always do is call out what's in the administrative adjustments. We do that. One, they're going to be in the budget amendment, so there's transparency, and two, we'll always call them out if there's anything of regional significance or note. So I guess that is what my notification to you is. We had brought in a bunch of state bond dollars and council bond dollars, and now the agencies are really just programming those. So this amendment supports the Thrive outcome of stewardship through responsible planning and management of resources for the Community Development Division and the Regional Park System. It also addresses livability by providing access to natural resources for healthy exercise. Our proposed action is that you authorize the 2019 Unified Budget Amendment as indicated and in accordance with the attached tables. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Augustine-Hubner. Any questions on that report, Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a change to this list from what was in our list 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, however long it was since we last had a meeting. There were several items where the money was scheduled to be turned back to the state because they hadn't spent their entire amount on a project and the project was done. So the bond money was going to be returned to the state or returned to the council. And staff has removed those items from this business item so that they can find a way possibly to keep that money in projects rather than sending it back to the state. Bond money is very hard to get. There was just something like $5.3 billion in requests for next year's bonding bill. And we can't be, if there's any way to get around it, that we can't be sending money back, that we fought hard to get that money for our park agencies. And so they're looking at ways to try and keep that money in projects rather than sending it back. So
Great. Thank you for
I
that.
support this item.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that would be helpful for a number of us who are new board members, we have a lot of onboarding training that's occurring over our first year of service. One thing to note is that a number of the finance and budget trainings have been scheduled and rescheduled. And I know we've had a couple of things come before us. For me, from a learning style and also just I think to increase transparency for folks watching and visiting or looking at our materials, I'd love to see a presentation of this information as opposed to an oral format. Um, that to me is really helpful. It gives me something to, as I have a rep here for taking copious notes, that I can do. It also allows me to listen and hear better. So I would just ask for that going forward, and I look forward to getting in back some of that. Train call was the July 15th where we had our last conversation. Time melts away here, like and just disappears like nobody's business. So I really appreciate the need to get this to implementing agencies, but I also want to make sure that we all feel comfortable with the decisions we're being asked to make and are given the tools to make decisions from a place of strength. So I would just really request that we have that as a part of these kinds of things going forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Councilmember. Noted. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is our fiscal year different than the park agencies? Is that part of this puzzle or not?
Ms. Agason-Hubner.
Mr. Chair, council members, partners work on a lot of different calendars. So we're working on the state fiscal year, our fiscal year, which is the calendar year, the federal fiscal year. So yes, I mean, part of it is I think it's just really going to always be a matter of timing. I think the core story here is the state passes money through us. And one of the requests that agencies have made of us is that we pass that money through as quickly as we can to them. And we have committed to doing that. And that would be the same no matter what fiscal year that we're working on.
Councilmember, thank you. Further questions? Councilmember Vento, you look like you're about to. No? All right. All right. Any further questions on this item? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Agason-Hubner, and I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. The next item is 2019-216. It says JT, but that is. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought okay, my mistake. Thank you, Michelle. It's 2019-215, Codes 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And that will be presented by Mr. Bowen. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Lindgren and council members. My name is Patrick Boylan. I'm sector rep for 13, 14, 15, and 16. So St. Paul, a little bit of Washington County, a little bit of Scott County, and all of Dakota County. I just want to let the community know that Alex Konzemius, the consultant Bolton Mink, is here today representing the community. In fact, for the next two following this, we'll be here. And just as a quick thank you to him and to his colleague Jane Cansier and Bolton Mink for all of their hard work. These small communities are a real challenge in the sense that they don't have full-time staff. And if they do have full-time staff, comprehensive planning or planning in general is not their forte. So again, compliments to Bolton Mink, to all their work kind of working with me and other staff here at the council to help bring this across the finish line.
Thank you for that. Thanks for your work and thanks for being here.
So where is Coates? Coates is in Dakota County, and it's a little untraditional map just to kind of give everyone an idea of where it is. An important kind of place along Highway 52. The system map shows County Road 46 is not named, but it's that east-west swooping road, Dakota County 46, and then the roughly north-south road is U.S. Highway 52 that connects the Twin Cities to Rochester. So there are no regional systems other than that. The community designation for the community is rural residential, and if you notice that it's surrounded by the cities of Rosemount, Vermilion Township, and Empire Township. And the forecasted growth is flat. If you notice that the population, households, and the employment remain the same. That is not uncommon for very small communities in Dakota County and other places around the metro. You'll hear presentations from myself and other colleagues as this year and perhaps into 2020. The existing land use for the community, the white is agricultural, not a big surprise. Dakota County is home to some of the best, most fertile, most productive agricultural land in the Twin Cities. And so the majority of it is ag, but the yellow shows residential, and then there's also some commercial areas along Highway 52, which is to be expected. Their future land use is pretty much the same. It's very similar. There's a few differences, but for the most part, maintaining the single family, some that are there, and then maintaining the agricultural areas, and then taking advantage of the proximity to Highway 52, again, connecting Twin Cities, the greater Twin Cities, and then to the south, Rochester. The proposed findings are that the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans. It's consistent with council policies and compatible with the plans of adjacent local government units and affected jurisdictions. Next Wednesday, the full council will consider this particular community's plan. So the action before you is to authorize the city to put its 2040 plan in effect and advise the city to implement advisory comments in the review record for local water management plan. I'm available for questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan. Any questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, the proposed action is to authorize the City of Coates to place its 2040 comprehensive plan to effect and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for local water management plan. Is there a motion?
Move approval?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. And on to 2019-216, Maysville 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Mr.
Before
Moore.
we begin, Chair Lilligren noted the JT on this agenda item and the following agenda item. Just want to say that that's apologize for that. That is a typo. JT does refer to the fact that those communities that are joint committee do go to the Environment Committee. And I just want to read something verbatim from the system statement here from the City of Maysville. It says, your community is not provided centralized wastewater services through either a regional or centralized wastewater system. Residential and commercial properties provide their own wastewater services through subsurface sewage treatment systems. The Metropolitan Council has no plans to provide regional wastewater services to Maysville. Just to make that really clear, this will not be appearing at the Environment Committee.
Thank you.
So where is Maysville? Maysville is in Dakota County, which is on the map there. And just to show kind of the proximity, Hastings is the gray community straight to the north, and then other communities, suburban communities in Dakota County are there as well. So what makes Maysville an interesting place? There is a baseball association that plays there. The Mud Hens play there. It's a small place like the previous plan and like the next one you're going to hear from me, but it's a real place. It's a charming little community tucked away in Dakota County, but very much part of the metro. This shows two things. One is that the ball field literally butts up against cornfield. I also have visions of Rain Kinsella and the Field of Dreams in that one too. But anyway, this map shows the green on the map is the ball field, or there's like a ball field kind of complex there. But except for Highway 61, there are no regional systems in Maysville, none. So not surprising, or just for a moment, sorry. The community is a rural residential completely surrounded by Douglas Township. And as the previous plan, the growth is completely flat, showing some modest employment growth, taking advantage of Highway 61. The existing land use, there are single-family homes. Again, the white in this map does represent agricultural areas. Again, taking advantage of County Road 91, which is the north-south, and at that point, 61 is an east-west. Taking advantage of the proximity to the highway there. Planned future land use is remarkably the same. Ag is going to continue. Again, fantastic farmland in Dakota County, outstanding soils. The residential and some of the industrial and then the commercial uses will continue as well. Proposed findings before you in the staff report is that it conforms to system plans, it's consistent with council policies, it's compatible with the plans of adjacent local government units and affected jurisdictions. This, again, will be before the full council later this month. The proposed action is to authorize the City of Maysville to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the record for transportation and water supply. With that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Questions on that report? Any questions? Councilmember Wolf, did you want to move approval?
Well, I'd like to move it. I do have a comment too. Would
Please.
you like me to make the motion first or the
Please.
comment? Okay, I would move this agenda
Okay.
item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great.
And,
Councilmember Wolf.
and then just comment, there's several small cities like this in my district. And I spent a lot of time with the last council trying to educate people that a lot of the requirements that we put into comp plans don't necessarily apply to everybody in the region. I mean, these are places that have been pretty stable the way they are for a very long time and aren't having major changes. And just coming up with people to be on the city council when you have a population that small is a challenge. So just being mindful that comp plans are not one size fits all. I also wanted to give a little insight into the character of Maysville as well. There is a restaurant there called King's Place that's well known for its hamburgers. And the building that it's in has been there since 1874 and has been various sorts of businesses, boarding house, saloon, grocery store, a bunch of different things over the years, but fantastic hamburgers there. And then right across the street is Viederholtz Supper Club, which is an old fashioned, like where the farmers would go for dinner, supper club. When you walk in there, it's like transforming back into the 1970s for a steak and a grasshopper or some other sort of fun little drink. Um, but the baseball field too is spectacular, and I've been to games there, and they do have a portage on, but they also have people walk next door to the fire station to go to the bathroom. I mean, it's a cool little community. So if you ever get a chance to come out there, that would you should give it a try.
Thank you for that local information, Councilmember Wolf. Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. And on to 2019-217, Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair. Um, this item is the 2040 comp plan for the city of New Trier. Again, within Dakota County, it is a very small community just to the west of the community we were just talking about before. New Trier has no regional systems whatsoever. It's completely surrounded by the city, by the Hampton Township. And it is a rural residential community. Employment, likewise, employment, population, and forecasted growth, likewise, the previous two agenda items are flat. Existing land use does show rather large institutional use, but for the most part, kind of a core nucleus of single-family residential, and then along Highway 50, some commercial properties. This is the institutional use. This is St. Mary's Church. It was built in 1909 as a Beaux Arts architectural style, and it was built by immigrating Germans from the city of Trier, so New Trier, city of Trier at this time, or at an early part of last century. Future land use includes much of the same. Again, the large teal area in the center of the map is the St. Mary's property they own, and then of course the residential and then the commercial properties along Highway 50. The proposed findings before you today are that the plan for New Trier conforms with Metropolitan system plans. It's consistent with council policies. It's compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Again, this will be in front of the council next week. And the proposed action before you today is to authorize the city of New Trier to place its 2040 comp plan into effect and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for local water management plan. I'm available for questions
Thank
at
you,
this
Mr.
time.
Boylan. Questions on that report? Questions? Seeing none, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lindstrom, do you have a question?
No.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Wolf, did you want to move the New Trier 2040 comprehensive plan?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
And then I would also like to talk about two restaurants in New Trier. The Trophy House it looks like it's not on the main drag. You got to turn up towards the church, but it looks like a house, but it's a restaurant. And they have amazing food. They're packed on Friday nights. They have a fish fry, all you can eat fish fry. And they have a roast beef dinner that is known throughout the region. They've won awards for the best fish fry, also, especially for those of you who like Lent, do the no meat thing. Get there early if you're gonna going to go because it does fill up and has a wait. But also Dan's Bar is right on Highway 50, and they have fantastic hamburgers, and they also have Juicy Lucy's if you're in the mood for them.
All right. Thank you for,
Mr.
again, yes,
So
Councilmember Johnson.
clearly, a regional meeting of some sort.
It needs to be out there. Yeah, New Trier and Maysville. I will make a trip out there, Councilmember Wolf, on your recommendation, for sure. Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Moen, for your work on these. Next item is 2019-218 JT, the City of Maplewood 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Ms. Wendell, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. The first plan that I'll be presenting is for the City of Maplewood. I am also the sector rep for districts 11 and 12, so that's all of Washington County and then the eastern parts of Anoka and Ramsey County. I'd like to let the committee know that we do have two members from the City of Maplewood here with us. We have Jeff Thompson, he's the Community Development Director, and also Michael Martin, the Assistant Community Development Director. So they're both here. I'd also like to thank them for their hard work on this plan, a lot of the coordination that goes on within Maplewood, and their plan has been fantastic. So
Thank you for being here and thank you for your work on the plan.
wonderful.
Ms. Wendell.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we'll get started. So for the regional systems for the City of Maplewood, they have a few different roadways that go through there, including Interstates 94 and 494 through the southern part of the city. They also have 35E that goes through the western part of the city, and also US Highways 61 and 36 go through the northern parts of the city. Included also within the regional systems is the Gateway State Trail, the Bruce Bento Regional Trail, the Afton Bluffs Regional Trail Search Corridor, and then also parts of Lake Phelan and Lake Keller are within the city as well. In terms of community designation, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as urban and calls for urban communities to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average densities of at least 10 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Maplewood is located in eastern Ramsey County, as we can see on the map, and is surrounded by the communities of Vadnais Heights and White Bear Lake, Matamidi, North St. Paul, Oakdale, Woodbury, Newport, St. Paul, Roseville, and Little Canada. So maybe it wins the award for the community that's surrounded by the most adjacent communities. Which is great. For their forecasted growth, as you can see, between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 6,400 people with 3,300 households, which will reflect 3,900 jobs within the community. In terms of their planned residential density, Table 2 in your staff report has a fuller list than what we've condensed here for the slide purposes. And so the overall density for the community will be between 11.65 and 28.58. And the city is planning for higher density residential uses in their mixed use, high density residential, and medium density land use categories, upwards as 50 units per acre, as you can see. And then also the land use categories within the slide here, you can see the different percentages they represent for residential, along with those different acreages. And then also it aligns with figure 4 in the staff report that shows where the anticipated staging will happen for their redevelopment. So each letter located on the table reflects that figure 4 map. So you can see where in the community those changes will be happening. In terms of his existing land use, which reflects figure 3 in your staff report, there's 11,573 acres, predominantly single-family residential at almost 35%, followed by commercial, park, and open space. And for their future land use map, which is figure 4 in the staff report, the plan stages development to accommodate their forecasted growth between now and 2040, and it shows the city's residential, commercial, and then 3 mixed-use categories, so mixed-use neighborhood high density, and mixed-use community, which reflects all of the different densities that they have within the table. And so with that, here are the proposed findings, that the plan does conform to Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Their meeting schedule, they will be seen by the Environment Committee on the 13th of August, and then on to the full council on the 28th.
And so I also want to just remind the committee that we have our 2 members in the audience, should you have any questions of them. And then the proposed action is to authorize the City of Maplewood to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city within 60 days after receiving the final Minnesota Department of Natural Resources DNR approval that the city must adopt the Mississippi River Critical Corridor Area, or MRCA, plan and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR Council National Park Service within 10 days after adoption. And then B, there, implement the advisory comments in the review record for the roadways and transit. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell, for the report. Any questions on that report? Questions? Councilmember Vento, would you like to move this?
Yes, I move approval of the City of Maplewood's 2040 comp plan.
Great. Is there a second? Yep, thanks.
I'd like to comment.
Councilmember
First of all,
Vento.
Jeff and Michael, thank you both for being here and thank you for all your work. Kudos to all of the staff and the council. As a resident of Maplewood, this is exciting. Since this is my first year on the council and my first experience moving approval for my own hometown, or not hometown, but current home. I moved to Maplewood 18 years ago, and normally when people think of Maplewood, they think of either the Maplewood Mall or 3M. And as this plan and the maps show, there's a lot more to it. And one of the recent developments, it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, like Fish Creek, about that time. The city of Maplewood, along with Ramsey County, the Friends of the Mississippi River, and some other organizations helped acquire a gorgeous parcel of land on the south end of Maplewood that it's just an amazing natural site. It provides great hiking opportunities, birding. It's amazing, and it's along Highway 61, between Highway 61 and McKnight, south of Lower Afton Road. We might have to do a site visit there too. But Maplewood has lots of hidden treasures in it. The city has not only amazing leaders, both elected and staff, but also a lot of volunteers who help make it a vibrant community. And I want to do a special shout out to the Maplewood history volunteers. That they've really done a great job of preserving their history and making it a part of the community. So this is exciting, and again, thank you, Jeff and Michael.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion on this item, on the motion? Further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember
Mr.
Vento.
Chair, I would have mentioned restaurants, but it would have taken another half hour.
I was waiting for that. The next item, 2019-219, JT, the City of Belle Plaine, 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Ms. Wendell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. As you may notice, this is in District 4, not one of my specific districts. Angela Torres, our local planning assistance manager, is here in the audience. She's the sector rep for this district, but I'll be presenting on Belle Plaine's 2040 Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you.
Cynthia Strack is the Community Development Director for the community. She's not here with us today for the meeting, but I did want to extend a thank you to the community for all of their hard work as well.
Thank you.
And so in terms of regional systems for Belle Plaine, as shown on the map, Highway 169 goes through the city with Southern Scott Regional Trail Search Corridor through that northern part of the city, and then also shown as the Minnesota Valley State Trail. The community is bordered to the north by the Minnesota River. In terms of their community designation, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as rural center. Belle Plaine is located in western Scott County and is surrounded by the communities of San Francisco Township, St. Lawrence Township, Belle Plaine Township, and Blakely Township. For their forecasted growth between 2020 and 2040, there is some growth in Belle Plaine. They're looking to increase by 4,800 people, representing 2,000 households, and an increase of 700 jobs. For their planned residential density, shown in Table 2 of your staff report, their overall density for the guided residential land is expected to be 3.41. And for rural center designations, the minimum densities should be between 3 and 5. So they are above that 3 for overall density. For their existing land use, as shown on the map here, The corporate limits are approximately 4,000 acres, but there's additional 4,000 acres in the unincorporated municipal urban service area, or MUSA, which is subject to existing orderly annexation agreements with Blakely Township and Belle Plaine Township for future growth areas. And so the city's predominant land use is low density residential at 44%, followed by floodplain, medium high density residential, and public. And for their future land use, the plan does stage development to accommodate their forecasted growth between now and 2040. It's comprised of residential neighborhoods, commercial centers, corridors, and employment areas. The plan does highlight planning for interconnected neighborhoods that are close to nature and that are walkable, livable, and sustainable. And neighborhoods will continue to be connected to vibrant streets in the commercial district and also in their productive industrial areas. And so with that, the proposed findings is that the plan does conform to the Metropolitan System Plan, is consistent to council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Their meeting schedule is similar to Maplewood. They will be seen by the Environment Committee on the 13th and then the full council on the 28th. And the proposed action, just one for the plan, is to authorize the City of Belle Plaine to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, could I please get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, council member. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the approval of the City of Belle Plaine 2040 comprehensive plan? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you for the reports and for your work on this.
Wonderful, thank you.
Next item, 2019-214 JT. It's the City of Eden Prairie 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Mr. Larson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Mike Larson, Sector Rep and Senior Planner in Local Planning Assistance. Before you today as a business item regarding the City of Eden Prairie's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I want to let you know that today we're joined by Julie Klima, City Planner for the City of Eden Prairie. I want you to all know how much I've appreciated getting to know and working with Julie over the last several years, in particular during the comp plan process. She's been an advocate for the local planning handbook, and I think she will be an excellent resource for us as we debrief from this process. So again, thank you for your engagement, your professionalism, and your patience. It is a sophisticated plan, and if there's time, I'd like to highlight something that's a little outside of the bread and butter of plans regarding equity that I was moved and impressed by. However, down to start with the basics, is shown in Figure 1 of your staff report. This map shows the location of regional systems in the city of Eden Prairie. All wastewater generated within the city is conveyed through the council's interceptors to the Blue Lake Wastewater Treatment south in Shakopee. Regional highway system elements include Interstate 494, U.S. Highways 169 and 212, and Minnesota Trunk Highway 5. And as you know, planned regional transit system elements include the planned extension of the Green Line, which I'm sure would have been helpful to get here, because we know traffic from Eden Prairie this time is pretty awful. Regional aviation system elements include the Flying Cloud Airport, and park and trail elements include Bryan Lake Regional Park, Highland Bush Anderson Lakes Park Reserve, and the Minnesota River Bluffs LRT Regional Trail. Trail search corridors include Highway 101, otherwise known as now as Purgatory Creek Search Corridor, and North-South 2, now known as the Bryan Lake Regional Trail. The plan also acknowledges federal lands within the community, including the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. As shown in Figure 2 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as suburban, and it's located in southern Hennepin County, surrounded by the communities of Minnetonka, Edina, Bloomington, Shakopee, and Chanhassen. Table 1, also in your staff report, illustrates a proposed forecast revision for the city. Current official forecasts are shown in the middle 3 columns, along with a proposed set of revised employment forecasts for the city that are supported by council staff. Forecast revisions are based on an analysis of current data as well as information provided by the city during the planning process. It is now forecasted that between 2017 and 2040, the city will increase by approximately 8,400 households, 18,700 people, and 9,700 jobs. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density for the city, which includes acreage the city has identified for potential development and its guiding land use policy for the most intense land uses, likely areas for redevelopment and allocation of the city's forecasted growth are largely associated with areas served by the 4 future Metro Green Line stations at City West, Golden Triangle, Town Center, and the Southwest Station. The minimum planned density expectation for suburban communities was 5 units an acre, and as you can see, Eden Prairie is consistent with the policy with a range of 11.8 to 31.9. So the city's existing land use pattern shows several significant features that include the Minnesota River Valley and National Wildlife Refuge in the southern part of the city, the Highland Bush Anderson Lakes Regional Park Reserve in the east central part of the city, and shown on the red circle there if you missed that coming on, and the Bryant Lake Regional Park in the northeast part of the city. Also, a significant feature is the location of the Flying Cloud Airport in the south part of the city, the commercial concentration around Eden Prairie Center, and the concentration of office and industrial uses, including what's referred to as the triangle. The city's future land use map refers here to Figure 4 in the staff report. The plan supports higher density growth and redevelopment in its station areas, with a focus on employment growth in the Golden Triangle area and a mix of residential and commercial in the town center area. Other areas of city support infill development of lower to medium density residential. The proposed findings for you today is that the Eden Prairie's 2040 Comprehensive Plan conforms to Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governments and affected jurisdictions. Just as a reminder, this is a joint committee item. The sewer plan will go to comprehensive sewer plan will go to the Environment Committee on next Tuesday, and then to the Metropolitan Council on the 20th. And the proposed action is that to authorize the City of Eden Prairie to place its comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's employment forecasts upward as shown in Table 1 of the review record, and to advise the city to implement advisory comments in the review record for surface water management and water supply.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Was there something else that you wanted to share with the committee?
Well, I thought, because we don't share a lot about the maybe the personal quality of all of the comprehensive plans, this is a multi-year undertaking involving numerous community meetings. And as I was reviewing Eden Prairie's comprehensive plan, I think early on in the year, I came across something that they referred to as the Eden Prairie Manifesto. And I thought it would be important to share this kind of this thing today. Just take 30 seconds. It states that we, as representatives of Eden Prairie businesses, city government, educational, and religious institutions, accept special roles and responsibilities in fostering diversity in our community. We are dedicated to upholding the rights of every individual in our community to freedom, dignity, and security, regardless of religious affiliation, race, ethnic heritage, gender, age, sexual orientation, physical or mental ability, or economic status. Representing all sectors of Eden Prairie, we publicly declare our intentions to continue the development of a multicultural community which will not tolerate acts of harassment and intolerance, to establish, communicate, and encourage community standards that respect diversity, and to promote acceptance and respect for individuals in an atmosphere of caring for others. So I thought that was nice.
Thank you
Share
for
while we're
sharing. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Larson.
bread and butter.
I have a question from Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Maybe not a question, but just a quick statement. One, thank you for sharing. I think it's just, we've talked about it before at our table, that it's just so valuable to hear what's happening in the comp plans from communities as it relates to our Thrive plans. One, if not to just acknowledge what they're doing. So I really want to appreciate you taking the time to call that out and to share that, and would love to hear that. It's Wendy left. I love to hear about burgers, and I always look at the Google Maps while we're talking. And then I look at the food in the area. I have a personal problem, and the ribeye looked really good at a couple of those places. Um, but I also think that it's so important for us to look at other aspects of what communities have gone through to make plans. I also just wanted to share with my colleagues, due to the work that I do outside of here, a lot of my work is in diversity, equity, inclusion, and a number of people have called out unsolicited the work of Eden Prairie and the manifesto. So it's not the first time I heard about it, but also it wasn't just in the statement, but in that it has started to lead decision making and conversations in the community. And so other communities have looked at it as a statement. So I just want to thank you for sharing that. Congratulations to Eden Prairie for taking that step, and I think that's the opportunity we have here, is to help hear these things so we can share what works. Isn't going to work for every single community, but it's helpful for communities here what others are doing so that we can help patch them together when there's a question that comes up and someone's saying, well, how do we bring this to life in our community, or how do we shape our decision making with an equity lens? It's a great example. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any questions on the report, Councilmember Johnson?
Not on the report, great job on that, but again, to the manifesto, just that statement, we all know, right, how much work it takes to get to that point, right? And how much consensus building and many voices are brought. So I just want to acknowledge what the process must have been to get there, and really want to hold that up to other communities. As a former community leader, a lot of us know getting to a point where you can finally publish something, and I think we're trying to work on that ourselves as a new council. That's a big deal. So I just want to send my congratulations, and I guess just my goodwill towards everything that you're trying to do in your city, and hope that it continues on throughout the whole region.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the report?
Okay, one more.
Okay, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just it dawned on me as you were making your comments, it's not passing me today the importance of this kind of work. And we have a few key areas where we do work at the council, but this is one opportunity that we have to highlight communities that are doing something that might help us get out of this mess we're in as a country. And so I just want to acknowledge that and not let that go unsaid. Something that I know has been weighing on a number of people's hearts throughout the day today with the violence and fear and hatred. So as I'm letting those words sink in, I want to say thank you to sharing that. Thank you to the city of Eden Prairie for allowing us that opportunity to acknowledge that kind of thinking here.
Thank you, Councilmember. Well said. And Ms. Klima, thanks for being here. Thanks for your work on this, and for being a great ally. So Mr. Larson has brought forward a series of proposed actions to authorize the city of Eden Prairie to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city of Eden Prairie's employment forecast upwards as shown in Table 1 of the review record, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management and water supply. Is there a motion? Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion on that? Motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thanks again. Thank you. And we will move on to our final business item, which is 2019-170, the CP Rail Regional Trail Master Plan from Three Rivers Park District. And Ms. Kenny, welcome.
Chair LaGrange, council members, good afternoon. My name is Tracy Kinney. I'm the regional planner, and I'm the parks planner in regional parks. And today before you is the CP Rail Regional Trail Master Plan. This is upon request of Three Rivers Park District in partnership with the city of Bloomington. Moving from left to right, you'll see these items in your business business item, figures 1 through 3. The CP Rail Trail, Regional Trail, is a search corridor in our regional park system. It's located centrally in our regional park system. In the middle image, the Regional Trail Search Corridor is located in the southeastern part of Hennepin County and then also in Three Rivers Park District. When completed, this regional trail will span 21 miles, connecting the city of Bloomington to the city of Crystal. This trail provides a much-needed north-south access bicycle corridor while providing access to 6 regional trails, 1 park reserve, and 3 regional trail search corridors. As you can see in the right image, the CP Rail Trail, Regional Trail, is divided into 6 planning segments. Each segment represents a connection between existing regional trails. For this request, Three Rivers Park District is proposing to master plan only segment 1. Segment 1 is shown in orange. It's the most southern portion. This segment connects the Minnesota River to Highland Bush Anderson Lakes Park Reserve in the city of Bloomington and continues on to 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail in the city of Edina. And I might note that Highland Bush Anderson Lake Park Reserve is a sprawling park reserve. It's also in the city of Bloomington. Segment A is the focus of this request. The remaining segments will continue as a search corridor and come before you again for master plan consideration. On the right is a close-up of the segment A, which is also figure 4 in your business item. This segment is 7.2 miles of separated trail that has been handled in 4 segments, 4 sub-segments, many segments here. Sub-segments A1 and A2 include 2.25 miles of existing trail that connects the Minnesota River and also the Minnesota River Valley State Trail to Highland Bush Anderson Park Reserve. This portion of trail is currently and will continue to be owned and managed by the city of Bloomington. Additionally, sub-segment A, which runs through Highland Bush Anderson Park Reserve, is 2.88 miles. It's existing. And this portion of trail is currently and will continue to be owned and managed by Three Rivers Park District. 2 subsegments remain. Subsegment A3 spans from the Park Reserve over I-494. This subsegment includes 0.5 miles of existing trail and 0.12 mile of undeveloped trail. This subsegment will be owned and managed by the city of Bloomington. And finally, A4. A4 is fully undeveloped. It's 1.28 miles of trail that provides that final connection from I-494 to 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. This part of the trail is located in the city of Edina and will be owned and managed by Three Rivers Park District. The estimated cost to implement Segment A of the master plan is $3.26 million, which includes $105,000 for land acquisition and $3.15 million for development. The total cost is divided by agency and will also include future requests of $126,000, respectively, for operations and maintenance. The proposed master plan is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, Planning Strategy 1, and other council policies. The proposed actions before you today are to approve the CP Rail Regional Trail for Segment A, notify Three Rivers Park District that a council-approved master plan for CP Rail Regional Trail Search Corridor Segments B through F is required prior to future funding requests, and then to also require the Three Rivers Park District, prior to initiating development of the regional trail, send preliminary plans to the Engineering Services Assistant Manager at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services Division for review in order to assess the potential impacts to the regional interceptor system. And I would like to note that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission unanimously approved the proposed action at their July 9th meeting. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Questions on that report? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This kind of goes into the weeds, but in segment A, in A3, it says location, trail connection over I-494.
Yep.
Is there already a bridge over 494, or will we build that bridge?
Ms. Kinney.
Chair Lilligren, council member, the segment that's going over 494, I-494, I believe is already built, and it was updated with the with a recent update. It was included.
Okay.
Trying to find that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee?
No.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
And it's the CP rail corridor, so it's a separated grade crossing there, I'm assuming, to that point.
Ms. Kinney?
There are
This
no
level of
ad-grade
detail,
crossings.
sorry, let me look it up in the business item. It's included in the business item, sorry.
Thank you.
Sure. If I could, you were asking about
Councilmember Allison?
494 crossing.
Yeah, I think it was.
The 9 Mile Creek Trail was just completed, and that provides that crossing
Okay.
where this is going to tie into that trail,
Okay, thank
or
you.
ties into that trail system.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It's a separated trail.
So the question, Councilmember Johnson, is this
It's clear.
grade separated? There
And
are no
it does say
at-grade.
Mr. Chair, it does say 7.2 mile separated trail, so I'm assuming it's already, to your point, separated. Or there's a corridor available.
Councilmember Allison Ingebrigtsen?
My understanding is that this trail runs along the side of the road, and will be a trail that's built out in addition to a sidewalk, but it is not a complete, so it's not an on-street facility, so that's technically considered separated. Does that make sense? It's not a bike lane or a protected bike lane on the street. It is a separate trail.
So, Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson?
separated means you're separating the rail corridor from a street corridor, and if it runs along, if you're just going over 494, it's separated, meaning it won't cross 494.
Yes.
And there are no at-grade crossings.
I'm seeing Emmett sitting down, and he's the staff
Emmett.
person, so I'm going to stop.
You're right.
But yes.
And
Ms.
Mr. Chair, that was
Kenny,
just a big deal in my former role that we had to get separated crossings,
Sure.
so your pedestrians and your bikes
Yeah.
and the cost in doing so is not cheap, but in
Right.
this case, I'm assuming it's there.
Ms. Kenny or Emmett, do you have more
Mr.
information?
Chair,
Yeah.
council members, it's my understanding that this runs along East Bush Lake Road as it crosses 494. So it is separated and protected from that busy road, but it is not along like a railroad bridge or whatnot. That is, I think, what you and council member Singerbritsen said. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Further questions or discussion on this report? Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to back up a little bit,
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the timing for the entire project. Are we talking a decade, a couple decades for this to actually be a reality, and about cost too? What are we thinking for overall costs? It looks like an amazing project, how it's connecting all of the different trails and the parks and et cetera. So fully supported. I'm just kind of wondering if we could back up for a second.
Sure.
Ms. Kenny.
Mr. Chair, council members, the overall build-out of planning for the trail has yet to be determined. The Three Rivers Park District has noted that they will be coming before the council when they can implement it. So probably many years. The overall costs are in the master plan, and I don't have them with me, but I can provide that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kinney has brought forward proposed actions related to the CP Rail Regional Trail Master Plan. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Again, working for your presentation. We'll now move on to our information item, which is the Public Housing Agency Plan. And that will be presented by Ms. Smith. Thank you for your help up here. And Ms. Keogh as well. So thank you for being here.
Thought we would tag team.
Great.
Good afternoon, council members and Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Terry Smith and I'm the director of the council's housing authority, the HRA, and I have with me my colleague and the HRA manager, Jennifer Keogh. Our goal with you today is to sort of set the stage for future action items on the public housing agency plan and administrative plan that will come before you. We have a public hearing scheduled on August 19th, and then the final documents will come for your approval in September. And so our goal today is to present an information item to kind of talk about the process, but then really dig in a little bit and try to provide some information on where the council and you as policymakers have discretion in setting policy for the HRA. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish today, and Jennifer and I will tag team. So I'll start with a couple overview slides. So as reviewed, Jennifer presented an item several weeks ago on the Public Housing Agency Plan, but the Public Housing Agency Plan is a document that's required for all agencies across the country that are administering Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher programs. And the document really is meant to be a guide for you all as policymakers, but for the public, for residents, and for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that lays out program policies for operation in the HRA. There are two parts of a plan that are subject of the public hearing that's coming up later in August and for your approval in September, but one is a 5-year plan. And that's lays out the long-range goals for meeting the needs of low-income families within our region over a longer-term period. So it includes the mission of the organization and goals in terms of how we think we can get there to meet the needs of the low-income residents in our communities. And then the annual plan is a document that's submitted each year, and it's really a more succinct document that outlines the goals for the coming year to meet the needs again of low-income participants in our region. So the current 5-year plan was approved for the period of 2015 to 2019. The subject of this year's plan, of course, is the 5-year plan that starts in 2020. The Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan is our main policy document. So it's the document you'll see on staff members' desks, and this is really how we operate our program. It contains all HUD mandatory policies, but it also contains discretionary policies. And some examples of that is it outlines how we will manage our waiting list. It outlines how we issue vouchers. So how long do we issue vouchers for when a family is issued a voucher and the process for doing that? It outlines occupancy policy. So how do we decide bedroom space for the program participants on our program? What are the procedures we follow if a program participant doesn't agree with a decision we make? What recourse do they have, and what is the hearing process to follow? So those are just some, brief examples of what this policy document contains. But it's a supporting document to the PHA plan. When we're making changes, particularly to our annual plan, most of them will be in this document. And in a couple of slides, Jennifer is going to go through what some of those recommended changes are for this year. But this document, as well as the PHA plan, is out for public comment. It's open for public comment for 45 days prior to the public hearing, and then it will stay open for 10 days after the public hearing. So in terms of how policy is developed here, just a little graphic to show Congress passes laws that overarching laws for the administration of the Section 8 program. Then HUD develops regulations from those laws, and then the Housing Authority adopts discretionary policies to go along with that. There are HUD regulations, which are mandatory, so HUD will say you must do this. And then there are also these discretionary policies where that we all have the opportunity, and you as policymakers have the opportunity to develop. Part of this is I have two examples here to try and illustrate some of the examples. As I indicated, this is a thick document, so we don't have time to go through every discretionary policy. So I'm hoping between now and the public hearing, you'll have a chance to look online at those documents to see where you have interest for further discussion. But the two I have here is HUD requires the housing authority, so we must review annually income of all the participants as well as household members. So we must do that each year as part of our process. But then HUD says the housing authority has discretion in terms of when we are going to conduct interim rent changes. So the period between, the two annual recertifications. So some housing authorities do interims every time a family increases their income. So if they get a raise at their job, their rent goes up. Some housing authorities may have a threshold. So if their income goes up by, for example, $500 in a month period, they will do a rent increase for that family. The HRA's current policy that was approved by your predecessors is that we only will do interim rent changes, so increase a family's rent in between recertifications. If a family is at zero income, so they have no income now, at the time they obtain new income, we will increase their rent. And the second part is when new adults are added to the household. So if a new adult with income is added to the household, that will result in a rent increase. And that's our current discretionary policy on that.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, when does this happen? When do they have the reviews for their changes?
I'm sorry, Ms. Smith. Excuse me. Thank you.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Chambliss. So when a family moves into a new unit, so say they move into a unit August 1st, and we have to do an annual review before August 1st the next year. So it's once a year.
So they're recertified each year?
Exactly. Okay. Right? Yep. Where we have discretion is in these interim policies, like when are we going to do income changes in between those areas. So HUD says we must do it annually. We can choose, you can choose as policymakers, how often we will change rent in between those annual actions.
Thank you.
I think if you look at the policy document online, Councilmember Chambliss, it will probably make more sense because the way our policies are laid out, we have a HUD regulation on the top, and then underneath it, it'll say PHA policy. So as you look through this document, you can tell which policies are discretionary.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Smith.
Okay. Another example here is that HUD says we must adopt policy, so we have to have policies in our policy document on how we're going to manage and organize our waiting list. So are we going to take paper applications? Are we going to do electronic applications? Are we going to do waiting list placement through a lottery? And you know some of this because we just went through the waiting list opening. We shared some of that with you. But that's all discretionary. Waiting list preferences. So one of the things Jennifer is going to talk about is a preference that we're proposing with this year's policy changes. But as policymakers, you can decide if we have waiting list preferences. And that means one population comes to the top of the list before another, whether it's veterans, homeless, families with children, persons with disabilities, those kinds of things. And Jennifer will dig into that. So there are lots of goals in our PHA plan document if you had a chance to peek at that. But in the PHA plan, section B2 includes 5-year goals. And some of those goals are repeat from previous 5-year periods, and some of them are new. Section B3 outlines how we've met those goals in the previous 5-year period. So we're telling HUD, the public, etc., the things that we've done to meet the goals in the previous 5-year period and in the previous plan. Some of the goals that you will see are we want to maintain and increase the availability of affordable housing and to be responsible stewards of financial resources. So we want to spend all our money. We want to serve as many families as we possibly can with the funding. We want to increase housing choice for residents. So some of the initiatives we've done to do that are to adopt, for example, higher rent limits in higher rent areas of the community. That's one of the policies that we've adopted that allow for more family choice. One of the policy goals is to encourage movement to areas in the region with less than 20% poverty. And this is one of the goals under our community choice program. So we have a program that helps, we have an outreach team that helps work with families that want to move to low poverty areas in the region. And we will help them do that and help them do goal setting and do some intense case management and services for the families that want to make them move. Conversely, we also want to administer programs to encourage integrated settings for persons with disabilities. But conversely to the helping families move to low poverty areas in the region, one of the goals we have is to really meet persons and program participants where they are. And one of the things we've been talking about is doing some investing in place strategies. So for those families that don't want to move, which opportunity means different things for different families. So what can we do for in-place investment strategies for program participants? So one of the goals you'll see is that we want to entertain developing partnerships with, for example, a school district to help those families in place and invest in place. We want to contribute to the goal of ending long-term homeless. So the HRA has several programs that serve homeless populations, including the new partnership with the Mainstream Vouchers, providing federal rent assistance to persons experiencing homelessness and sleeping on the train. That's one example of that. And then we also want to promote self-sufficiency and help stabilize families. So a lot of the work that we do is helping stabilize families and help them increase their wealth through the programming that we do. So those are just, a few of the goals, and we're happy to dig in deeper if you have questions after looking at the document. And Jennifer's going to talk about some of the proposed changes for this year.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. So as Terry talked about a few slides ago, we amend policies when regulation requires us to do that. And again, we have discretion in policy development. And as your HRA leaders, we're tracking mandatory changes. So as HUD puts things out, we are tracking them, and we ensure full compliance with any regulatory change. If the regulation requires immediate implementation, we will always implement and then make the changes to the plan and get your approval at a later date. Discretionary changes, we try to come to before you once per year. You may see us more often than that, but that's our goal, is to do things like this where we can come to you and say, we've reviewed our changes, we've done public engagement, and here they are. So what you're going to see, if you were able to go onto the online document, is that we have 13 total proposed changes to our administrative plan this year. 4 of them are required by HUD, and 9 of them are discretionary policies. And of those 9, 6 of them are really to clarify language and to match our policy with our current process. 3 of those discretionary changes are policy changes that we want to discuss with you tonight, and that is our waiting list preference, our minimum rent policy, and biannual inspections. And we touched on 2 of those when I was here in June, and so we're going to dig into those a little bit deeper tonight. But before we do that, I wanted to talk to you about community engagement. We believe that engagement with our key stakeholders is absolutely critical to policy development. So we follow the council engagement plan to engage affected groups in a way that influences the outcome. We engaged with key parties through the use of our resident advisory board. So we spent some time in June talking to you about that resident advisory board. And we also met with our landlord advisory board. That resident advisory board, again, is a group of voucher holders who provide feedback to us on the policy changes and procedures. Last time we met, Councilmember Chambliss, you asked about, could we look at having that group be an ongoing group to dig into policy and to really be more of an advisory group to us? And I'm happy to say that when we met with the 59 members at our 3 meetings in July, we have 17 folks that said that they would like to continue and meet with us. And so we are going to structure that on a quarterly basis. and do some ongoing engagement with those families.
I think if I just might add, I think Councilmember Johnson, that recommendation indicated that came from her. So we apologize for that oversight.
It was a joint thing.
Or maybe it was both of you. So we thank you both.
I support that.
Thank all of you because you gave. Let's just you all gave a great amount of feedback to us. So thank you for that. So the resident advisory board, I also wanted to note that we invited families that were impacted by this minimum rent policy that I'm going to talk to you about, or that we'll talk to you about tonight, to participate in those meetings. And we had 7% of the families that would be impacted. So there was 270 families that we said would be impacted by that policy. And we had 7% of those folks attend the resident advisory board meetings. Back in July of 2018, we created a landlord advisory board as a strategic initiative in landlord recruitment and retention. So this group has served as an advisory board to us over the last year, and we used this group to talk through the policies that would impact them and their business. In addition to engaging with our residents through the resident advisory board and our landlords, we also spent some time talking with our staff that are the administrators of our program to get their feedback on proposed policy changes.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, the Landlord Advisory Board, does that include this organization called Multifamily Housing? And they've been putting these signs up that says safe and affordable housing throughout the neighborhoods?
Ms. Keel.
Chair Lilligren, council member, the Landlord Advisory Board they are participating with the Section 8 program. So they're a designated group of landlords that have identified that they would like to participate in policy and development in partnership with us. But I don't think that we have any affiliation with that.
I think Councilman Chambliss' question was, is the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association a member, or they have representation on the Landlord Advisory Board? Was that it, Councilmember?
That's my question, yes.
So Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Chambliss, we are members of MMHA, Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Many of our landlords are also members of that organization. So MMHA, some of the landlords that are on our focus group are likely also members of MMHA, but it's a separate organization. And we do lots of program marketing in partnership with Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, but it's separate.
Okay.
Councilmember Chambliss.
I just want to say that I have some concerns about the way that they're marketing the needs. A lot of people are, when they see, the signs that say, we want safe and affordable housing, and you look at, their list of issues, a lot of their issues make it harder for residents to qualify for housing. And so I just wanted to find out if that organization is included and note that, and encourage the council members to look into what the landlord issues are and what the resident issues are as we make our decisions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Johnson, did you?
Just briefly, I'll come back to this about engagement in a little bit, and thank you for this good information. But to piggyback on that, if we're a member of those questions, I mean, we would have a stake in the discussion. We wanted to bring something forward, and I'll just come back to it around engagement too. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions?
Yeah, I got a question.
All right, Councilmember Atlas-Ingebritsen.
I just have a question for Councilmember Chambliss. Could you share a little bit more on
Oh, well, I'm not as quick as you are with researching this stuff while I'm in the meeting on Google.
Oh, okay.
But, some of the things that they wanted to do was just to make sure that there are no changes to how residents are screened.
This is in the city of Minneapolis. They oppose a slate of regulatory changes that are considered sort of renters' rights and good for renters. And so they've launched a campaign in the city. I think it's just in the city of Minneapolis.
That's where I've seen the signs.
Yeah. And I live in a high rental
North
community, so a
Minneapolis.
lot of the big buildings have these signs for, what is it, Councilmember Chambliss?
It says safe and affordable housing.
Yeah. So
I can
it's
send
an anti-regulatory
the link
reform
out,
campaign.
but I think we should research it.
And to clarify, we are a member of it.
we're a member of the association, Ms. Smith, correct?
Mr. Chair and council member, yes, we are. I think it's $400 a year to be a member, and what we do for that is it gives us an opportunity to engage with landlords. So we'll go to events and we'll present information on the Section 8 program as a landlord recruitment strategy, and really to try and dispel some of the myths that are out there about the Section 8 program. We have a booth at their fall and spring conferences where we're disseminating information about the voucher program. We've been on speaking panels to market our community choice program and some of our other special programs. So that's the interest that we have in being a part of that organization.
Councilmember Allison Ingebrigtsen.
Chair, I wonder if it makes sense for us to ask that either move that we ask staff to look into this situation and provide us with some recommendations or.
Well, so thanks, Colin. I don't know that we need a motion, but I think Ms. Smith is hearing this, and I guess the question would be, and to let me know if this is kind of the question, what does our membership within the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association mean as it relates to their political activities? Ms. Smith.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and council member, I think it means nothing. I mean, we don't have any political voting power through MMHA. We just have benefits to their member services, which is access to their events, access to their mailing list, but we don't have any voting powers or anything like that. But I can check. What I would be happy to do, Mr. Chair and Council Member Allison Ingebrigtsen, is look into what this is and just find out what the messaging is and find out more about it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, I think that'd be great, Chair. What I'd be looking for is congruency with our values and our equity statement and Thrive, and if there is any discongruency between those things.
Thank you.
And especially for groups like them who are advocating for less affordable housing and less access to housing is really concern. Therefore, me and from many other council members here.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a related note, I was going to bring this up anyway, but about individual landlords that are in our advisory board. I used to be the director of constituent service for Mayor Chris Coleman, so I understand when there are certain things that, because it's the free market, governments can't control. So, and I don't use this word lightly, but in some places there are slumlords who the cities can't really do anything about, right? And if there are people there are landlords who don't share our values, if they are on our board, what kind of weight is their input, and what is the threshold for a landlord? Is it a one person shop? Is it a small company that has 20 properties, or is it right? So, what is the threshold, and who exactly is on this board?
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee, it's a combination. So some are mom and pop landlords, some are larger management companies that have lots of units, and it's not really a board. We would more call it a focus group. One of the things we're going to talk about is biennial inspections, and that has impacts to both tenants and landlords. So as part of the process of trying to think through the implications of adopting a policy like this, we want to talk to tenants and landlords because the concerns are different. But I would say it's a combination of both small and large landlords.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions at this point? Seeing none, Ms. Keel.
Great. Okay. All right. And as we go through each of the proposed policy changes, we will talk a little bit about what we heard from our residents. And I should also note the two big topics that we talked to our families about at the Resident Advisory Board. We talked to them about the minimum rent policy and the biannual inspection policy. So we spent an hour and a half of constructive time talking about and digging into both of those policies. So the first item that I want to talk to you about is, of the three main policy changes, is waiting list preferences. So Terry started talking a little bit about this in the beginning about where we have discretion. HUD allows housing authorities to adopt waiting list preferences, which means, again, we allow certain populations to be served before our general waiting list applicants. The current preferences that have been approved through our administrative plan is that we would provide preference for a family that has been terminated or is at imminent risk of being terminated from one of our programs due to insufficient funding. So if we had a program that was looking to not have enough money, we could provide them a preference to get a voucher, and that means they would get a voucher before another family on our waiting list. We also have a residency preference for waiting list placement. If you recall, when we were talking to you about the waiting list several months ago, 95% of our waiting list placements are from the 7-county metro area, and then 5% are from out of state. And again, those are the discretionary policies. So those are the two preferences that we have. Terry mentioned we have the discretion to determine what populations we would maybe want to give a preference to. Some housing authorities give preferences, again, to working families, folks that are veterans, the elderly, homeless populations. And we have, and you have as policymakers, that discretion. The preference that we're proposing tonight is called a move-up preference. This is a preference that is a strategy to assist the region in solving our homelessness issue. What it does is it basically opens up supportive housing unit for a new household experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to try and break it down for you. So HUD, this is a policy that nationally HUD is supporting that would say that if there is a person in the community that's living in what's considered permanent supportive housing, and they meet some thresholds, and they've been determined that they're ready for independent living, so they no longer need services. What they could do is they could be referred to us, and they would basically get that preference and jump on top of the waiting list. But what it does is then it opens up a permanent supportive housing unit for somebody perhaps that's riding our train and needs assistance. And so we're looking at it sort of as kind of a 2-for-1 for solving this regional issue. The sky is not the limit, however, right? So what we have said is that we would set aside 40 of our turnover vouchers per year. So that's the proposed policy, is that 40 of our vouchers that turn over every year would go to this population.
Ms. Keogh, I have a couple questions from
Yes.
council members here. Please, first Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Cummings.
I just wanted to clarify that this is one of the answers that I had requested earlier with regard to how we're going to deal with the homeless, in particular those that were riding the train. So that might have been where the confusion was. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
And thanks for the follow-up.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how many, currently or historically, how many families would be ready or individuals would be ready to move up?
Ms. Keogh, or is it Ms. Smith?
That's not, she was sliding me a number, but that's not the number.
Oh.
That's for something else.
So we don't entirely know. So this is going to be a partnership with the Continuum of Care. And so we're not entirely sure how many folks right now would meet this preference. We've talked with the folks at Hennepin, at Ramsey, and Anoka, the 3 counties that we have partnerships with, the Continuum of Care partnerships. And I would say there's probably 90 maybe in Hennepin County that would meet that are on a permanent supportive housing with a voucher. Now, there's lots of different ways folks get permanent supportive housing, so I don't know those specific numbers. So I think what we would be doing is we would be getting those referrals through coordinated entry. So they'll make that determination of who meets the threshold and who would get referred to us for that move up preference.
Thank you.
Just,
Councilmember
I'm
Cummings.
understanding this, but there would never be probably a question about those 40 being used. I mean, it wouldn't be like, oh, well, we only had 20 that qualified, so we
20 are
got
sitting there.
20 sitting there, right?
Use 400.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Cummings, we don't ever have vouchers just like sitting on the shelf. So it's not like we'd take 40 vouchers and sit them on the shelf and wait for referrals. We have 65 or so vouchers turn over every single month, and we have to fill those slots. So this would be one of the avenues we would use to fill those slots. And, you know, the referrals would trickle in. And so we take them as we get them. They'd be prioritized, as Jennifer said, through the coordinated entry system and the continuums of care. The other thing to note is Minneapolis Public Housing and St. Paul Public Housing are also looking at adopting this preference. So it would be a collaborative effort, you know, depending on where the permanent supportive housing unit is. And then the other thing I'll add is we have about 600 vouchers turnover every year. So this 40 would come out of that 600.
Thank you. Councilmember
Sorry,
Cummings.
one more follow-up here. So in coordinating with the other HRAs, does it make sense to try to have similar policies so that we're all kind of working with the same set of rules and so forth?
Ms. Q.
Mr. Chair, council member, we are doing just that. So we're the first that put together the language for the policy. We've shared it with both Minneapolis Public Housing, St. Paul, as well as the Continuum of Care to get their feedback on that. And our hope is that we would be aligned. We've talked about the number of turnover vouchers that we would each be allocating. And I think because we're the largest voucher provider, we would slate a few more than Minneapolis and St. Paul. But their numbers aren't defined, but I think it'll be very, very, very similar.
And the other HRAs that are not Minneapolis, St. Paul, or the Met Council, that you also coordinate with them?
At this time, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Sorry.
Keep me in line. Mr. Chair, council member, at this time, we have not heard that any other housing authority has the ability because of voucher turnover and priorities. But we would be open to having conversation and helping align that. But at this time, we don't know that anyone but the big three are looking at this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have council members Mousse, Alice Ingebrigtsen, Lee, and Chambliss in queue. Councilmember Mousse.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Is it possible to also include this list to homeless families and large families, really large families? So, to you, those are, as you know, if there's a possibility for adding those two groups to this list.
So,
Ms. Smith.
Council or Chair and Councilmember Musa, are you asking or suggesting that we adopt a preference for homeless families and large families in addition to this preference?
Is that a possibility? Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Musa, that is not part of our recommendation in the proposed policies. I think one of the things we struggle with as a housing authority and as policy recommenders, recommending policy to you all is what populations do you put above other populations? You know, the disabled community wants us to have a disabled preference. We know we have a crisis, I would say, with homeless population, particularly unsheltered homeless. So should we have a homeless populations? There's an effort at the state level for being the fourth state to end homelessness among veterans. So do we have a veterans homeless? Do we have a preference for larger families? Do we have a preference for elderly because we have an aging population? So it's been a really it's difficult to recommend policy to figure out which populations, which is why we thought this made sense, because it indirectly serves homeless populations, because it opens up one of these permanent supportive housing units for a high priority homeless family. So it's indirectly, I would say, a homeless preference of sorts.
Councilmember?
Leave it at that, yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen says her question got answered, as did mine, so thank you. And Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is sincerely not a political question. I was curious, the 5% of out-state folks that we help serve, who is paying or how is that being subsidized, and when did that start? Did that start? Was there a historical trend? Like was that post-recession or?
Ms. Smith.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee, we've had that waiting list policy in place since 2015. And it was a decision we made with your predecessors, but it's 95% of waiting list placements have to live, work, or attend school in the 7-county metro area, and the remaining 5% can come from outstate Minnesota or out of state. If we serve, so say somebody's on our list from Dayton, Ohio, they come up to the top of the waiting list, that family has to move here to our region and live in our service area in order to get that voucher. But then it comes out of our pool, right? So they take one of our 600, turnover vouchers. They have to move here in order to receive it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, and that partially answered my question as well, but that second bullet where it's indirectly opening up a permanent supportive housing unit, I'd like to unpack that a little bit further in terms of the process of what would happen once those units opened up as far as the homeless. Do we need to also, as a council, be more specific about the preference for the homeless for those spots?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I'm not sure we have control over that. So part of how the system works is through coordinated entry. That coordinated entry system prioritizes who gets what service. So families that come up to the top of the coordinated entry system will be referred to these permanent supportive housing units. And because we don't control those, we don't own the units, we don't provide the services, and frankly, don't provide the subsidy for a lot of those. We don't have control to say we want these. If a unit turns over in a permanent supportive housing unit, we want it to go to a homeless transit rider, for example. We don't have the power or the authority to do that. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes, that does answer the question about how and why it's set up this way.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Can you explain to me what exactly permanent supportive housing is? What is that? What are those things? Yeah.
Ms. Smith.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, it's a person that's receiving housing subsidy with supports. It could be a tenant-based subsidy, so the subsidy could be connected to the tenant. For example, the Metro HRA administers what's called a continuum of care program. They're federal subsidy dollars where the housing authority, HRA, the council, provides the subsidy, and then the services are provided through the counties. That's permanent supportive housing. So if someone could transition off of that program, it would open up that tenant-based slot. It could be a building, so there are buildings out there that are permanent supportive housing buildings. So these are units that have services connected to them. And so that would be considered permanent supportive housing. So I think there's a variety of these type, supportive housing all over the place.
Councilmember.
Chair, thank you. Is it possible to get like a specific example? Like you can nod yes if I'm right. Someone living in a common bond community, would that be considered permanent supportive housing?
It could be, as long as that unit comes with support.
Like some type of social service provided supports.
Correct.
So
not all common bond buildings are
not all are supportive.
No, please, Ms. Keogh.
Keep me in line, seriously. There needs to be federal dollars associated with that. So an example would be Hearth Connections. So Hearth Connections has dollars associated where they can house a family, and they provide all of the supports for that. So an example would be, let's say a person's been living there for 18 months, and they're ready to transition on. They no longer need those supports. They would be a great candidate for this move-up preference. So they would get referred to the move-up preference. We would issue them a voucher. It opens up a slot for somebody that needs intense case management, needs it, and has been homeless and needs a unit. So that would be an example, would be like Hearth Connections, for example. And they apply for those competitively through federal obligations.
So I have another queue as Councilmember Vento, then Councilmember Cummings, and Councilmember Chambliss.
correct me if I'm wrong, Terry and Jennifer, because I may take this off, but as an example, Lenny, I think higher ground in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, they have, I believe it's the third and fourth, fifth floors that are just this type of housing. And when those folks are ready to move on, this would be a perfect example. Many times they come to higher ground using the temporary first floor facilities, but as their stay continues, they move into those supportive housing options. I've got one question about this. A really big part of the McKinney-Vento Act is the education stability, and I'm wondering if with this providing these vouchers, what happens in terms of that school stability, if we've looked at that at all, if it's ever been an issue as they move from those permanent supportive housing units to our units, or what happens to them in terms of school?
Ms. Smith?
Chair and Council Member Vento, so you're thinking include in terms of stability for the children?
Right.
So part of it is if they're living in, let's use the higher ground St. Paul as an example, they're living in a supportive housing unit in higher ground St. Paul. Because they're in St. Paul, they'd probably get one of St. Paul's move up vouchers, but then they could remain, the family can choose where they want to live and use that voucher, so they could remain in the same school district, for example.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. So, we would hope that someone who was determined to be ready to move up, and they did move up, and that opened up a spot. If in fact that was not a successful move up, do they, and obviously we don't want them going back out on the street, do they get preference then to move back into the system with another voucher, or?
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Council Member Cummings, I think that's another thing we can't control, because the idea is once a person moves on, they take the voucher, that permanent supportive housing unit is going to be filled by another family. So for them to go back to that permanent supportive housing exact unit is probably unlikely. Are there other programs that they could maybe tap into to ensure their success in independent living, whether that's mainstream services, whether that's another permanent supportive housing unit that becomes open? I think absolutely that's a possibility, but again, it's probably not going to be that same unit because it'll be occupied.
Right, and just so that there's something. It's not just, oh, this didn't work out, too bad.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss, thank you.
Thank you. I just was wondering if it's possible for us to track as people move up, is it possible to track what's happening with the homeless, for example? Are they able to, get into the system? How many people per year move from homelessness to getting a voucher, for example, due to this change in preference? Can we track that year over year?
Ms. Smith?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I mean, we certainly are going to track who gets these move-out vouchers and where they're living and their success. But in terms of tracking what happens to that permanent supportive housing unit and who moves in there, we'd have to think about that. I think there are reports through coordinated entry where coordinated entry can run reports and determine who's getting referred for what unit and what service based on need. But that again is not a system that we control. We would track the folks getting the vouchers through the move up preference, but I'm not sure I'm understanding your question correctly.
Well, Mr. Chair, so if we say that, it can indirectly help, people who are, having a hard time finding, permanent housing, I don't know how we would track that. If it's one of our goals, maybe we could make a request of the other organizations to, provide some statistics, at least at a high level, so we can kind of look and see how we're doing with that metric.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I think we could, request reports through coordinated entry. So, there's hundreds of people on this coordinated entry system, and they get prioritized according to need and the level of vulnerability. So, with the idea that the people with the highest needs get the referrals first. And so, but, you know, the people on the coordinated entry system are experiencing some type of homelessness, right? So with the idea that if we're giving a voucher, we know that that is freeing up a permanent supportive housing um, um, unit for somebody because we know this person is vacating. So indirectly, we know that that's going to happen. But I think we could try to work with the continuum to see what kind of reporting we can get to flag the coordinated entry system or something to make it work.
Councilmember
That's
Chandler?
correct. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair. That's exactly what I'm asking.
Okay.
Thank you. Further questions, Councilmember Muse?
Oh, thank you. Mr. Chair, I know our systems really does not serve well large families and homeless families, and I know it's very difficult based on your answer, but at least can we explore the possibility of adding at least one of them, either large families or homeless families? And I think those groups are really struggling. Well, I'm not, under being discounting the other groups, but I think our systems really struggle with addressing those two groups.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Musa, I think that's certainly a policy discussion we can have with you all to determine if there are other preferences you want us to consider. And then the timing of that. I mean, is that a discussion council members want us to have before the adoption of this, policy in this coming year? I guess it's a decision for you all to make if you want to have that discussion.
Thank you.
I look forward to that conversation.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Allison Robertson?
One of the things I'm wondering about, Chair, thank you, is and we might have received this, and I'll go back through my notes, but you can also remind me if we have, and I need that reminder because then I'll know where to look. But I think one of the things I'm still wondering about is what are the gaps in our system right now? We know we have this acute pinch that we've all talked about because there's people on the trains, which is important. But I am also wondering, just have we seen the demographics of who's we know that, and we know also we've heard about the gap of how many people have applied versus how many we have. But I don't know that we've seen kind of the demographics of who are the folks in need. I know we've talked a little bit about just homeless population in general and who that is, but it would be helpful to have that kind of information when considering this too, just so that we're looking at that and compare it. So is it families? Is it, two parent working households with kids? Is it young families? Is it homeless from specific ethnic groups or specific age groups or service? What does that look like? That would just be helpful. And I found it hard to research that on my own. I found more information kind of unpacking populations for younger people, young people under the age of 24 impacted by housing instability in our region, but I haven't found good all information in one place around the entire population of people experiencing housing instability.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, there's some the 2018 point in time count. So HUD requires all continuums of care all around the country to conduct point in time counts of, and this is specific to homeless, so people experiencing homelessness, and the results were released. And the fastest growing population of people experiencing homelessness are those that are unsheltered. I think the staggering statistic that sticks out to me is that Native populations are 27 times more likely to experience homelessness. So knowing that statistic, one of the items I'm going to be bringing before you on August 19th is an information item on applying for some more of these mainstream vouchers. And we need to determine what population and what partners we want to have for that application. Chair Lilligren and I had a discussion about this earlier today as well, but we want to figure out if there's a Native partner in that, because we know this information is out there that with the Native population. So it's those kinds of things, but we have data on unsheltered homelessness. We have data on the need for affordable housing. We have data we can probably get it from Wilder broken down by race. Well, the point in time count stuff is broken down by race, etc. So I'd be happy to put something together for you.
Councilmember.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the other things that in the little bit of research I was able to do is I saw that there were some issues around homelessness and those people who are, and maybe this is where the term unsheltered, terminology is, a whole nother thing, but people who are living on someone else's, has a whole family living on a couch in someone else's apartment. And so it would be good to know those two dynamics. Some of what I saw said it isn't as easy to find and separate those two things. I think that was one of the critiques of the study on young people experiencing homelessness, that it didn't necessarily capture people who may be able to live on a couch and couch surf, but not those who completely were homeless or not able to do that. So versus those. So I think also adding that dynamic in there, even it's helpful to know, here's what we don't know, that's even helpful to know. So that sounded really silly when I said it, but I hope that made sense. Okay. Thank you.
I have in queue council members Lee and Cummings. Councilmember Lee.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I grew up in Fresno, California, in the center of California, and California is experiencing a huge homeless issue. And Fresno County just did a report, and it showed that a lot of the folks who are homeless actually, they're working folks. They still have, they're working two full-time or two part-time jobs and living out of their cars, and these are regular hardworking folks who just can't afford an apartment or a house. And in the early spring, we were told that Wilder was going to do some kind of qualitative research around this kind of issue, and I was wondering when that will come out, and if we could get something similar about these very humanistic interviews that we'll get a better snapshot of who exactly is out there and how and why they're not sheltered. And if I encourage staff to look at the Fresno report. Thank you.
Ms. Smith, any response?
We'd be happy to look at it, Chair and Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, I think. So where are we now also with the issue of veteran homelessness? I know that the governor has made that a huge priority, and we said veteran homelessness, I think, once during this discussion, but I'm just wondering where we are, and as far as how that works into our consideration of preferences also. I really don't want to lose sight of that. I think it's incredibly important.
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I was actually at a meeting this morning. I go to a bi-weekly meeting at the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs. Other PHA partners are there, Minnesota Housing, Department of Human Services, the Veterans Administration, and it's all about how do we end this, because there's about 200 homeless veterans left on the Veterans Registry. Most of those are not eligible for these special veteran vouchers that are out there. The council, we all have 157 of them, but these are veterans that aren't eligible for those because they have to be veterans that are eligible for VA services. So the discussion now is about what kind of services and housing assistance can be dedicated to get this last group of hardest to house homeless veterans housed, right? And so we're in there's a meeting scheduled later this week that I'll be part of with the public housing authorities, and I'm assuming that one of the asks is going to be, can we dedicate some of our regular vouchers to homeless vets? I don't know for sure, but that may be the ask, but I think it's part of the discussion, and I think nobody has the answer yet.
Councilmember?
Just a quick follow-up. So what veterans would not be eligible for VA services?
Ms. Smith.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Cummings, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know there's one piece that has to do with how they're discharged from service.
Okay.
That's one example I can give you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
And thank you to that point. I mean, so I was dealing on a local project in my district recently where it was very critical that they secure Section 8 vouchers, and they had come to Met Council, but the only kind of vouchers Met Council had was the veterans vouchers. So they were able to go back to the Plymouth HRA and luckily we're allocated enough vouchers into the program that we're not restricted for that project. It's all very difficult. It sounds simple in that sense, but it's very difficult. And that's what frustrates me. If we have homeless veterans who don't qualify for the homeless veteran or the veteran Section 8 vouchers because they don't meet the criteria, but they're in the 200 and some odd veterans that are homeless, that drives me nuts because those vouchers can't be used for anyone else. So here we have vouchers for them, but those vouchers can't be transferred to other large families or other homeless folks, you know, and it'll come up in the next part of this for me, but it is so incredibly frustrating, and I know you guys live it every day. We're all here for this. We're talking 40 vouchers. We have thousands of people that went through a waiting list. There are no preferences there, so now we're going to start reordering preferences, and you know, I just get a little fired up. I mean, this is a fight at the federal level. We all know that. And the next item is really showing the pressure that keeps, you know, they're ratcheting down and ratcheting down and ratcheting down, and we're becoming as creative as we can be and creative as we can be. But all we're really doing is trying to prioritize, rightfully so, who's most in need. But that's such a subjective, you know, thing, and we need more. So I think it's incredibly difficult. I applaud you for the work you're doing with all the other partners, but there are such juxtapositions in here where I'm like, well, we've got vouchers over here, but based on federal rules that we can't change, they can't work there. So doesn't mean that we just set them aside and too bad. You know, they'll impact the other vouchers, which the waiting list there is extremely long. So I'm just spouting off a bit. It'll roll into the next item. And I just have to say, we all gotta, you know, gear up and get to that federal level, talk to our Congress people. It's election year coming up, and you know, people are not disposable. We can't just say goodbye, go somewhere. So this is incredibly important. All of us, I commend, 40 vouchers here. I get it, but we're tweaking. The problem is so immense. So I'll be done now.
Thank you. I have in queue Council Members Cummings and Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, for me, I like this side 40 turnover vouchers moving up and opening up. I think that sounds like a really sound way to use some of the vouchers, and it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just wanted to share that and I'm definitely not an expert in this, but having a brother-in-law for a veteran who does not receive benefits, I want to be clear, it has nothing to do with discharge being dishonorable. It has to do with branch of service, length of service, type of service, and a number of different factors. And so I just want to be clear about that not all veterans who did their service for the time they did don't have full or all of the same types of benefits. We found that out when his daughter went to college and she wasn't eligible because he didn't serve long enough for the types of certain that was required. So just to be clear that there are veterans who served well and were discharged honorably and don't necessarily have all those same access.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Ms. Smith, a couple things. One, I would agree with Councilmember Cummings. This is a good proposal, I think, and I think it's thoughtful. It starts to move people through the system. To the questions about data earlier, Councilmember Allison was saying there just isn't really all that good of especially longitudinal data on some of these folks, and so I'm putting a lot of hopes, I guess, in the recommendations that came forward from the homelessness work group at the state level. And there are things about the people who, we're not in charge of the continuums of care or the coordinated entry, but this is the part that we can have impact on. And so the more coordinated all of our efforts are across the region, the more people that will be benefiting and acknowledging their humanity, I guess. And so this is a way of stepping into that. But my question for you, Ms. Smith, is that how would you like to, so if there are policy proposals that council members want to bring forward during this period of public comment, and how would you like that to happen? Do you want it to happen here in committee and open forum? Do you want to have one-on-ones with that council member or the interested council members to see how to move forward? How would you prefer to
So Chair
proceed?
Lilligren, I think what probably makes sense is if there is a group of council members that wants to talk about adopting a certain preference or not, I mean, could we have a small group conversation? I mean, we could certainly do it here at committee, but I think part of it is, um, I think I'd like to see some consensus among council members about
Sure.
what preferences you want to explore. I mean, we could be here for 3 days
Right.
talking about different
Like
options, and I don't
workshopping.
mean that disrespectfully or flippantly. I just,
Nope.
this is a big policy document, and it could be 3 times this thick. So I guess what I'd like to hear is after council members have some opportunity to look through this, to maybe think about what you want from us. I'm happy to, so for timing, we have the public hearing scheduled for August 19th. The public comment period will be open for 10 days after that. But we'll be coming to you in the middle of September with the final document for approval. And so I think between now, we have to have those discussions, because between now and then, we're going to have a formalized document. The other thing I would offer up is if we decide that, okay, council members are supportive of the move up preference right now, we adopt that in September, we can have policy discussions all through the year. And if we decide we want to adopt additional or different preferences, we can come back and do that after we get the policy document approved. I think that timing probably makes more sense, because then we really have dedicated time to dig in. We have opportunity to engage our residents about potential policies. And so I think that's maybe the best way to proceed.
Thank you for that guidance. Councilmember Chambliss?
So I was just curious, for this proposed policy, were there like 5 or 10 different preferences that were looked at and then this one was decided? And if so, perhaps we could get a list, of that, or the process for selecting this move-up preference as a good option for us to hear.
Ms. Smith?
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Chambliss, we did not dig into any other specific preferences this year. I mean, we've certainly thought about many of them over the years. This one came up as a way to help with the homelessness crisis that's happening right now. And it, in my opinion, is the way we're indirectly helping homeless populations is plugging into a system that's already at play. If we had a general homeless population, then it would be us prioritizing and figure out who gets these homeless vouchers. Where here it's the system that's already in place through coordinated entry and through the continuums of care, that system will decide who are the highest need, and then the permanent supportive housing providers decide who's ready to move on with the voucher. I think it makes sense, but the answer to your question is we didn't dig into any other preferences this year.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen?
I'm thoughtful of the time, so I just wanted to ask for one other data point. I think it would be helpful to know who's currently served by the permanent support housing. Currently, my guess is they'd be able to tell us what are the demographics and the populations they serve across that partnership, so that we could know who are we prioritizing and getting access, because that's who we'd be prioritizing, is whoever those folks are. So seeing if that would also be a nice piece to have, along with the demographic information of the need, gaps, and opportunities.
Ms. Smith? Further questions or comments? Councilmember Lindstrom?
Just to hammer home the point, it's your understanding that Minneapolis and St. Paul are moving forward with this pretty much exact recommendation on the same timeline that we are.
Ms. Smith? Or Ms. Keough?
Mr. Chair, Council Member, I'm not entirely sure what the timeline is. I know Minneapolis will probably be falling in line with us within a month or two, and St. Paul probably shortly thereafter that. But I would say within, 6 months, we should all be in line.
Ms. Keough? I'm sorry. Councilmember? Thanks. Do the Minneapolis, St. Paul, the other the other PHAs, are they on the same 5-year schedule we're on, or are those staggered? The five for the 5-year plan.
So Council or Mr. Chair, St. Paul's fiscal year I think starts in March.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what 5-year cycle they're on, so I don't know the answer
Okay.
to that. The other thing that I should mention is because Minneapolis has this moving to work authority that we've talked about,
Right.
they have a little bit different trajectory. They don't do a PHA plan, for example.
Okay.
So this will be part of their moving to work plan, adopting this preference. So their process
Okay.
works a little bit differently.
Thank you. Thanks. Councilmember Johnson.
So to the process, and again, this is all really good. Greater Miss Pieta program today, Meredith did a fantastic job speaking on all of the programs that we're doing as it relates to economic opportunities for all, which did include addressing homelessness and housing in our communities for workforce. But when we are going through process deciding if we should do this, and there will be a comment period, and we're looking for engagement and input, but I hear that Minneapolis and St. Paul will be following us, and they'll be doing it a month after, and they're working on it. It just feels to me, and it's not that I'm opposed to this, but it feels to me that this cookie's baked and we're pulling it out of the oven. So I just don't, I guess I don't understand. And I know we got to kind of see around corners and plan, and things can change and be altered. And again, I really appreciate this work. But that's where I'm just like, we say we're going to be doing things, but we're still taking input. We're asking for the other options. One of my questions earlier, and I don't need an answer now, is even though we had like 8 landlords and, one meeting, and then 59 total attendees, and some of them will be on the permanent thing. I still feel like somehow we're missing a broader audience in all of this, and maybe through that comment period we'll pick them up, although I'm not sure. But that, I'm just saying right now, a process to me means we haven't decided yet, but I'm hearing that everybody's falling in line. So I'm new to the Met Council, and those are one of those things where people ask me constantly. Feels like things are already kind of decided before they're really decided. And again, I'm going to tell you, I think this is the right move. And I think, again, we're sweating it out to make sure that the right people are getting the vouchers as soon as possible. But there's hundreds more right behind them that is deserving, right? We all know that. So I'll just leave it there, because that to me, it's just one of those things where it's, is it kind of a done deal? I don't think so. But yet, I suppose we're prepping everybody else around us in case it happens. That's all I'm noting.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento.
Mr. Chair and Council Member Johnson, I agree with your comments. I would, however, say that 59 is a lot in terms of people coming to those meetings when you consider all of the other challenges they face on a day-to-day basis. And to the extent that I don't know how we back this up or change the timing of it without impacting and increasing the crisis even more. It's kind of to the point where if we don't somehow get out ahead of this, we're going to be making things harder for ourselves. And when we get to the next slide, we're going to be operating in an even bigger deficit. So I don't know how and I'm new to this and much more so than many of you because you've got experience at the city level, but I don't know how we fix this other than tonight just to plow ahead and do what we can. And as we go along, learn from this, but I'm not sure how many more landlords or people you can get into a meeting that will really ultimately make a difference. This is just so critical. We've got to get out ahead of it. So for what it's worth, that's my thought.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, then Councilmember Lindstrom, and Councilmember Cummings.
I think what I heard in Councilmember Johnson, and I'd agree with, is that our role is as a policy board. And if the policies are coming to us and it feels like it's already half-baked or mostly baked, it's better for us to here's the scenario and where we're at, the reals of it, and let us deal in that situation. I think you kind of said that in the context that here's what's happening in the broader community. We think we should be a part of what's happening because we think there's alignment and systems change that will be beneficial. Making the argument for that, I think, is the part that we're looking for more information on to see does it pass that sniff test? Does it really meet the obligations of of the need, and us having that opportunity to make a decision about that and weigh in on it. It's not just unique to this conversation here. I think it's something that we're dealing with across all of our work areas, is how is a policy making body like ourselves, given the opportunity to get the information, have opportunity to do our own conversations with constituents or learning or just thinking about it, to then make a good decision and in a way that takes good practice in mind. That's what I'm hearing. And I think that there's a place for us to kind of think through this a little bit more as we figure out how are we going to do our work as this council in partnership with staff. So I think we've heard it enough across enough areas that it's just good for us to take a step back in the planning and timing to really make sure we're getting that time to have an informational conversation and then coming back for a decision at another date, allowing us to have our own thoughts put together, but also allowing us to hear from the public prior, if especially when there's a public uh, opportunity like this, before we make that vote. Program process wise, I think that would be beneficial.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah, Ms. Smith.
So a couple of things just in response to all this. I agree with all of you. I think having, as Jennifer indicated earlier, having that ongoing resident advisory board and having a group of residents that we're going to be engaging with throughout the year, it won't seem so rushed, because part of it is at some point you have to draft policy and review it with folks. From a historical perspective, in past years, last year we had a similar engagement process with residents, but I would say in years prior we might get 10, 12 people that come to the resident advisory board. So we have expanded our outreach to get more residents to come to a meeting. It's hard to get people to show up. So I would say Jennifer and I are pleased that we had 59 people come to the meetings, but I agree with you. The purpose of having the engagement is to get feedback. And with all of the three of these proposed recommendations tonight, the resident advisory board members were supportive of all three of them. If we went to that meeting and they said, I don't think we should do this, I think we ought to look at serving our veterans better or something, for example, then that's when we go back to our desks and talk with you all. Here's the feedback we got through the public policy, and we wouldn't be moving forward. We may still hear some comments through the public hearing process or through the public comment period that will make us rethink some of these things. And maybe we don't want to do this and we want to do this instead. So I think that's what is all part of this process. But we propose this language because we think it's a good thing to do. Now it's up to us to talk to others if they think the same. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Still talking about the process a little bit. So you had the community engagement process, and then this move up preference came forward. People were supportive. And then did you put your heads together with your counterparts in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and you met and lots of emails exchanged, and you all three said, okay, we're going to move forward on this? Is that generally how it went? And then I'm also just curious, are there things that we are moving forward independently of those two, or are they doing things independently that we thought was not a good fit for us?
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and Council Member, a couple of things. So the idea of this move up preference came out of the Unsheltered Homeless Design Team meetings. And so those meetings were convened by the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness. Chair Lilligren has been a big part of those meetings, but it's service partners, providers, shelter operators, counties, cities, state agencies all coming together to figure out what we can do about this crisis with unsheltered homelessness in our region. And one of the ideas, the local director at the HUD office was at that meeting, and that's where this move up preference came about. So it's the director of the HUD office that suggested it. There are other agencies all around the country that are adopting this preference. And so that's where the idea came from. So as part of that unsheltered design team meeting, and then from that, we met with the HUD office and the 3 housing authorities to say, how would this work? How could we do it? We got some national examples of language on how it's worded from different agencies across the country. And we kind of, Jennifer worked with our partners in Minneapolis and St. Paul and kind of tweaked the language to have it make sense for us. And that's how it came about.
Thank you. Councilmember
Thank you.
Lynch.
I would lead with that. I mean, like this is coming out of that. This is a collaborative process from day one, where you all were brainstorming ideas, and this is the one that really rose to the top.
Thank you. Good suggestion.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. I agree with everything that's been said here, and I think the process we discuss continually as it applies to everything that we're doing. And I suspect that tweaking the process to work the way that we hope that it will work in the future is going to be an ongoing discussion, and it's going to take a lot of input and a lot of thought and a lot of long meetings. In the meantime, I think that we are in an extreme crisis situation, and I think that taking some action, we can talk forever, and I think that taking this action, it's not, cast in concrete and can never be tweaked or changed or anything else, but I think it is based on what you have said and where this came from and all of the input that brought this specific policy change up is rock solid, and I for this point in time, and I think that to do this now and then continue to work on other things and preferences and process and all of that. But I think taking a concrete step is really, really important.
Thank you. Further discussion on this proposed policy of move-up preference? Further discussion? Ms. Keel.
I'm going to turn it to Ms. Smith.
So now we get to the minimum rent one. I think they get, this is a hard one. And part of it is, you may recall that HRA, I hired somebody, a national consultant, to come in and do an operational assessment of our business with the purpose of identifying potential efficiencies in work process, trying to figure out how we can do things better, knowing that our funding keeps getting cut and cut and cut, and maybe this consultant can think of things that we didn't think of. And this was one of the recommendations that was made in that report, was to adopt a minimum rent. As you all know, the HRA is currently operating at a deficit, and in interest of time, we're not going to get into that today, but Heather Agason-Hebner and I will be back on September 3rd to have an in-depth conversation with you about that. But we're running a deficit, and your predecessors had some decision points last year to make with this reduced deficit, and the choices were to reduce the program size by about 200 families, to look at cost-saving measures, or to subsidize with different other funds, or do all of 3 of those. And so when Heather and I come back on September 3rd, we're really going to dig into those, but those are tough decisions to make, right? But part of this, HUD requires housing authorities to establish a minimum rent between $0 and $50. The HRA today has a 0 minimum rent, and we've always had a 0 minimum rent. We've never adopted a policy to have a minimum rent. There are currently if we were to adopt a minimum rent policy, there are 270 families out of the 7,000 that we currently serve that would be impacted by a potential policy change, and that's 4% of our current voucher holders. A $50 minimum rent would result in an annual cost savings of $162,000. So essentially, it would puts the burden on the family to pay $50 minimum rent, and then it's $162,000 savings on our budget, is what this policy change is about. There are considerations at the federal level. So HUD requires housing authorities that have a minimum rent to have hardship exemptions. So if a family can't pay the minimum rent due to financial hardship, that we consider those hardships. There are 4 mandatory hardships. One is that a family has lost eligibility for, is waiting for an eligibility determination for federal, state, or local assistance, could maybe Social Security, for example. The family would be evicted because they're unable to pay the minimum rent. The family's income decreases because of change in their circumstances, and this would include they lost their job. And then a death has occurred in the family.
Councilmember Vento.
I have a dumb question. I'm not critiquing these 4 exemptions or types of hardships and such and the criteria, but how much do each of these contribute to the deficit? Or could they? I mean, currently they don't because we don't have a $50 rent. But how much could they contribute to a future deficit?
Right. So it would be Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, it would be $162,000 towards the deficit.
But if you've got these exemptions, doesn't that? I mean,
So,
is there any way of anticipating that?
Part of it is there are 3 types of exemptions. So when a family says, I've lost my job, I can't pay my minimum rent, they would submit an exemption request to the housing authority, and we would review to see if we determined there was no hardship. The second one would be a short-term hardship, meaning 90 days or less. And then the third one is a long-term hardship that is meant to last longer than we can predict. Under the first 2 scenarios, no hardship or a short-term hardship, the federal rules require that the family pay that minimum rent back.
Okay.
So they could get it. So for a night, they lost their job is a good example, right? They could lost their job. If that's a short-term exemption, if they have 90 days to find a new job, but then the housing authority is required to enter into a repayment agreement with that family to pay that $50 minimum rent back.
Okay.
And this is an area where we don't have discretion. It's a requirement by HUD. The long-term exemptions, if someone is in a car accident and becomes disabled and is in the hospital and can't work and can't seek work or whatever the case may be, those long-term exemptions do not need to be paid back.
So
those are federal rules.
I guess my point is, Mr. Chair, we may have savings of $162,000.
Probably won't.
We may
somewhere between 0 and 162.
Yeah. We may spend, we will spend more administrative time reviewing hardship exemptions.
Right.
But part of what our staff does every day, all day, is engaging with residents on what their rent portions are going to be. Right. So there's conversations all day, every day about their income has gone down, their income has gone up. And so it's part of what we do already. We'd be doing it in a different way.
Right.
But it's very difficult.
Would this mean a need for additional staff?
Chair Lilligren, no.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Lindstrom.
I was just going to say, I suspect that the consultant that we hired could answer that question, because there's metropolitan areas all over that have this minimum rent type rule, and they also have hardship exemptions, and we could find out, I suspect, pretty easy that in Atlanta, 10%, get the hardship exemption, so we can count on that 162 going to 142 or whatever it is.
Good point.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, 79% of the housing authorities across the country have a minimum rent, have adopted a minimum rent.
70, how much?
79%, so 21% have a 0 minimum rent as us. And I think in these reduced budget environments, more and more housing authorities are adopting it. We certainly have partners all over the country that we can dig into to, see if they can predict how much administrative time they spend reviewing exemptions and how many hardship exemptions they process per year, for example. It's a good suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And do the other HRAs in our, or PHAs in our region have a minimum rent?
Most of them do. Mr. Chair Lilligren, most of them do. St. Paul, Minneapolis do.
Okay. It's $50.
I think so.
Ms. Keel.
Chair, Minneapolis, because they have been to work,
Oh, that's right.
they actually have a $75 minimum
Okay.
rent. St. Paul, I believe, is at 50. I know Dakota County CDA is at 50, and the others, I believe, I think we are the only housing authority in the region that do not.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Alice Ingerbritson.
Thank you. A couple of things. One, I would prioritize hearing from them. What are they able to collect through that expectation? Because they're in our region, so it would be most comparable. And I think that's really meaningful. I mean, 162,000 is one position plus some benefits. Maybe not. Maybe it's two. But and second question is, did you mention what our deficit is in the program? I know I've heard it at previous meetings, but I just couldn't recall it today.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, it's 1.9 million in this year's budget, and that's to cover subsidy and administrative costs, so to serve all voucher families.
Councilmember.
So just a quick follow-up. This really is not a structural change in a way that has any significant impact on that.
Ms. Smith. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. If I could just.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that was more of a statement.
Okay.
My son would say, was that rhetorical, Mom? He's 12. I love that he's learning the meaning of that word. Anyways, so that to me, to create a new policy, to add administrative effort and practice for something that's not addressing a structural issue, to me seems like maybe not that meaningful. One of the questions that I believe, and I wanted to hear the answer to this, that Councilmember Wolf brought up I think at one of our onboarding sessions at the very beginning, and also brought up very recently, was that, and maybe someone else can say this better than me because I'm trying to remember it exactly, is that other communities pay in to receiving the services that pay into this, and we do not ask communities to do that. So is that what you mean under the subsidize with other funds? I know it also could mean that the council previously voted to take funds they had and use it for this purpose. But is that inclusive of that, or is that off the table?
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, I'm hoping to save the details of this budget conversation for the September 3rd meeting, but the short answer is that's what I mean by subsidize with other funds, whether it's HRA reserves, general fund money. It's the whole conversation with Councilmember Wolf that our housing authority only serves part of the region. We're taxing the entire region. It's that whole conversation, correct?
Okay.
Councilmember.
Yeah, I just think that that's a big, to make a decision about this, I will be impacted by that conversation. And I think that that's really valuable. There's another cost to adding administrative steps. And for folks who, I was just crunching some of the numbers, $24,000 a year for a family of four. That's $12 an hour working full time. But we know for most of these people, they may be working 2 or 3 jobs just to make that. When I think about housing, $50 a month doesn't sound like a lot to me, but $50 a month to someone who's raising a family of 4 on $24,000 a year or less, that's the maximum you can make, right? It's tremendous. And so to do that, have that kind of impact, not only that, but to have them have to show additional documents or spend their time doing more administrative stuff, that makes it it's already a full-time job being poor. so we're adding that. I didn't see that. I'm getting ahead of myself in the slides, but so I just think for the benefit we're getting from this, I see a lot of cost to us, a lot of cost to the users, but not a lot of benefit for addressing the structural deficit. And I realize that many communities are doing this nationally, probably for reasons that I don't think are really about return on investment, but more about a show to some degree, unfortunately.
So I have in queue Councilmembers Johnson and Vento. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate those comments because that's where I'm going with this. So, on the item before this, we're really working hard to prioritize the scarce resources we have. And in this case now, we're going to add under, a scenario where we are not funded fully by the federal government, but in this case, we're putting forward a solution where we're actually going to add an extra burden to 270 some families. So that's where I struggle. And to the points made earlier, it's going to be additional administrative costs. It's going to be an additional burden on the families that have to work through all their exemptions or work through the paperwork. It is a job being poor. And so the point earlier, and we'll get more information around the budget, but we do have local HRAs that are not part of the Metro HRA. They're their own HRA. So they tax their own taxpayers to fund their own HRAs. So what we are having to do, and so now you can take note, it's Councilmember Wolf, Councilmember Barber, Councilmember Johnson. We have these HRAs in our districts where they're being doubly taxed essentially because they are getting the Metro tax to subsidize Metro HRA that won't help them, but they're also in a bind because their HRAs are underfunded too. So that's the piece where we need to figure it out. And I think, if I may, I'm, hearing from Councilmember Barber, I mean, we're trying to fix what we hope is a temporary problem, but now we're in year 2 and maybe in year 3. So that's a piece. But to go back onto the very people that are struggling, where the lists are long, their days are hard, we're going to have additional administrative costs. And for maybe $62,000, it's just like when we just had this, hand wringing, heart wrenching discussion about how to prioritize people on 40 vouchers. It's like, gosh, I feel like we're just going in the opposite direction on this one. So I'd like to maybe just keep this in mind, but I'm probably not, I'm going to be open-minded all the way through for when I vote. But I'm really struggling on this one because I feel like, even though I mentioned process earlier, I'm in on that. But then I feel like I'm just throwing it in reverse on this one. So I'll just tell you all, we all know from service in our communities, right? We know people are struggling. We know who they are. I lived this life. It is hard, trying to get up and get whatever obligations you have and get out the door and not have a boss mad at you. And then there's paperwork and to get my WIC and my cheese and my what, and I've got rent and, that was a long time ago when things probably were way easier. So I really want to be careful because to me, for $162,000, I just really want to be careful because it's true. We're trying to backfill and buffer this hole in the budget because we're not getting the appropriate funding. I just think we're going in the wrong direction. I think we need to paint some signs and get to DC. I really don't know how adding one more hardship for even $50 again, it is money, but the time and intensity of everybody trying to figure their paperwork out, it's hard. So I'm going to struggle on this piece of it, heads up, but it's with the right mindset, I think, coming at it. That's all. And I really, again, let me tell you, I appreciate the solutions you're bringing forward. I appreciate your expertise because there are just no good solutions when we can't fund the need. And so I just want to be grateful in my concerns about some of the solutions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Vento.
Mr. Chair, do any cities have like a scale instead of one set amount?
Ms. Smith.
Council member or chair and council member Bento, if you're a moving to work agency, you can probably do some sort of a scale. I've never seen a policy. It's usually what you see is a $25 minimum rent or a $50 minimum rent or the two amounts. There's been some proposed legislation at the federal level under the current administration to require a mandatory $150 minimum rent. That hasn't gone anywhere, but that's on the other extreme. But I've seen 25 and 50. Um, Depending on the hardship and how long that goes and the amount of the repayment, the federal rules dictate the length of the repayment agreement. So if a family owes more, their repayment agreement is longer for repaying for the term, the time that they were in a hardship status. Two more things, Mr. Chair, if I may, that I think would be helpful is when we know bringing this policy discussion to you all, there's no, like Councilmember Johnson said, there's no good solution to this. So I see this as just one piece of many things we are looking at doing. Just to give you some perspective, one of the slides I showed you earlier is if we were to stay within our federal budget, we'd have to reduce our program size by $162,000 will serve 18 families, so can provide rent assistance to 18 families. If that's helpful at all. So, some of the pros and cons, and these are things you're all thinking of. These are, the clear things. I mean, this puts a burden on the family. It could contribute to evictions. It could, explaining the implementation process and the hardship exemptions can be complicated. I do think it's worth noting the conversations that we had with the Resident Advisory Board on this topic. And out of the 59 participants, they were overall supportive of this policy change when they heard the background. Part of what Jennifer and her outreach team presented to the folks were the policy decisions that we're faced with in terms of reducing our program size by 200 families or subsidizing with other funds and presenting some of those things. Families get it. And there was one that really hit home for me. There was a resident that attended. She was previously homeless for 3 years before she got her voucher. And she said that it motivates people to work. It helps people think about how to become more self-sufficient. One of the residents said, if you think about paying $50 for your unit, that might cost $1,000 or $1,200. A lot of what Jennifer heard, and she can talk more about this because she was at the meetings, but it helps people become financially self-sufficient. And families figure it out because they have to, but it's an extreme burden to families. We get that. Our average income is $17,000 of the families that we serve, so $50 is a lot. And so we get this, but I think it's important to note that overall, they were supportive of this policy decision because of the trade-offs. If they were going to be one of the 18 families that loses their voucher because we don't have enough money, some of those kinds of things, and that's not, the policy decision has been made to use other funds, so no families lose their vouchers. And that's, the situation that we're in today, but it's, people get that it's a very difficult policy decision.
Thank you. I have in queue Councilmembers Cummings and Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is just huge and hugely complicated. My reaction to this as a standalone is $0 to $50 is overwhelmingly huge increase and a huge burden. The comment motivates people to work is an interesting one because, as we all know too, that many people are already working 2 or 3 jobs and can't make ends meet. I understand what you're saying and what this person said, but it also kind of assumes that most people are not working, and I think we know that they are. I would like to, again, it doesn't do anything to have an impact on the structural deficit, which simply has to be addressed because it's not going to get better on its own. And maybe it has a place, and maybe it's not $50, but maybe there is some minimal rent as part of an overall strategy to address the structural deficiency as well as minimize going forward and not lose people. But boy, just as a standalone, ooh. So I'm looking forward to the conversation in September, but I could not sleep at night if I went $0 to $50. I just think that's way too big a burden to put on people who are already in need, not to mention all the things that others have mentioned as far as more paperwork and more things for someone to think about, to do, to be able to move forward. We can do better than this. This is the United States of America, and we can do better. We need to figure out how to do it, and it's not going to be easy, but it's not by furthering the challenge to those who are in need and are most vulnerable. That doesn't work for me.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councilmember Cummings. I appreciate your comment. I want to say thank you for the advisory group. Thank you for responding and having it be an ongoing group. I think that's very important. I look forward to how can we better utilize that group. One of the things I just want to caution about is the implying that by them spending $50 a month, they're going to save 200 families from, because that doesn't fill the gap. Does that make sense? I wouldn't want that to be the message that is given to them, because it's not accurate. And even if they paid that $50 a month, we could still have a problem if we can't figure out an answer to the solution. So I think that's dangerous, and I would probably correct that perception. And I also want us to be careful, and I really, really want to reiterate, I appreciate the advisory group. I appreciate that we're listening to them. I want to be careful that we don't pull quotes or highlight things that reinforce what we want to have happen, or lead people to that space. Because $50 in a savings account towards an IRA would make someone financially self-sufficient. You know what I'm saying? There's other ways we could spend $50 a month to motivate them better to have a more higher paying job, online job training or something like that. There's other things that we could do in that. And I just want to caution us when we do engagement to make sure we're not, it's make sure that we're not leading people to the decision we want them to come to, and needing to take into account the dynamics of power when having those conversations. It's really hard for someone to look at someone in my seat or in your seat and tell us something we don't want to hear. And so it's an art to be able to glean that out of a room and to create a safe enough environment for them to contribute. So I just want to cautious us in that way, and make sure we're being thoughtful and responsible in that. And I just, again, appreciate the work that's going into that effort. But like all things, you're starting off in one place, and we need to hone that too.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Smith, I think it might be good when we have this conversation after the whole policy process, the hearing and such, to also include as a part of that conversation how we as members of this committee might help influence federal lawmakers, our two U.S. senators and our congressional delegation, the House members. The current vilification of major cities, in my opinion, is not helping us in this conversation about the housing crisis, because it's where it's really hitting hard. I think it probably, I don't think this is anecdotal, I think it's true that in Minnesota, a lot of our increasing housing crisis here in the metro area is the result of a lot of people in greater Minnesota leaving those communities and coming here and struggling to find affordable housing, struggling to find jobs, struggling to just deal with those changes. And so to the extent that we can maybe play an active role in having conversations, and I don't want to get in the way of folks who do our lobbying for us. I don't want to get in the way of the other housing agencies, but I just think that to the extent that we can help reiterate just the crisis point we're at and the help we need. Say again what the current administration is proposing for a minimum rent, 175?
150.
150.
I can't,
Ms.
I should say, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, Congress has to pass that.
Right.
For it to go
Right.
through. So, I just think it's worth mentioning because that's, the discussion at the federal level
Right.
to some point, but it has to be passed by Congress, and I'm not confident that will happen, but.
But we have to help, Mr. Chair, we have to help our congressional delegation have the facts and the passion to fight against that 150, because they get into a bargaining position, they could agree to 75. And we're struggling with 50. So, just a thought.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Johnson.
So I wasn't going to bring it up, and I'm late for my daughter-in-law's birthday, which is not a good thing, but this is more important. Sorry. My daughter-in-law. But I want to get back to the engagement piece. So thank you so much for reaching out. I really appreciate having a standing committee. The only thing I would say is, to the comments that were made earlier, and what I was going to talk about it is, it was, a series of 3 meetings in various locations. And I just know that from 20 years in public office, you have one meeting and some people show up. It depends on when it was, how it was put together, how it was notified. Was it during work hours? Wasn't it? Is it on a bus line? Isn't it? Was there youth activities that night? Was it a, place of worship night? Whatever, right? So even though we have a set number of people that showed up that raised their hand and said they want to be on the standing committee, I really still want it to be really representative of the people that are stakeholders in this, and not just the people that happen to be able to come to something on a night. Because I mean, all of us receive notices all the time. I have my Met Council invites coming at me left and right, and I can barely get to the things that I would love to get to, right? And I'm able-bodied and can do anything I need to do and have transportation and the funds to get there. So I guess with the standing committee, and as we look at advisory committees on the council, some of them we interview and appoint, and we don't want to make it arduous and harder to be part of this group. But I would also say just, making sure that, again, there's some assurances that whoever's going to serve in this represent the people that may be paying the 50 or maybe paying the 150 or may lose a voucher or whatever. And again, so grateful for your outreach to get the folks there. But one meeting is not always the, various constituencies within the block you're trying to help. I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know who was there. I don't know where they came from. I don't know if they were suburbanites. I don't know where they were from. But I just want to make sure we are getting input in whatever way we can on some regular basis. And I've been thinking about that since I brought it up a while ago. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions. Ms.
Okay. So here's our last policy area that we'll try to go through the talking points really quickly on.
I appreciate you all sticking around. So biannual inspections, and we talked a little bit about this in June. So HUD in 2014 changed regulations that allow housing authorities to inspect units biannually instead of annually. And this was done really in an effort to streamline program operations and reduce administrative costs. In 2015, the Metro HRA began piloting biannual inspections. Just a note, we conducted in the last 12 months, we conducted 11,956 housing quality inspections. And the implementation of a biannual inspection policy would result in a reduction of about 3,000 inspections per year. And I'm going to dig in a little bit in what we would do with that reduction in time. So like Terry's slide, I tried to put together sort of what we see as the pros and cons of this implementation. And I do want to say, like the minimum rent policy, none of this it comes from a place of trying to do more with less. And so that minimum rent policy that Terry spent time talking to you about, that's where that comes from, is we are trying to be stewards of money and do more with less. And so with the biannual inspections, that's at that place we're coming from. So again, it's a reduction of 3,000 inspections per year. We see that as an administrative cost savings where we could be more efficient. We look at what we would do with some of that time is refocusing the administration to doing work with our landlords. Making sure that we are spending time with our landlords in educating them about preventative maintenance, how to pass their inspection on the first time, and doing outreach with them. Working with the families that we serve, talking to them is that this is less stress by going to biannual inspections. When we were doing our outreach, folks were saying, I have a city inspection, I have a tax credit inspection, I have your inspection. They may have 3 to 4 inspections per year that they're taking time off of work. And so looking at it from that standpoint as well. We also look at it as this is a landlord incentive. So when we're looking at recruiting more landlords into our pool, that this is an incentive for participation. When we look at sort of the cons or why wouldn't we want to implement this policy is less assurance of unit safety. Tenants fear retaliation if the unit is in poor condition and they report it to the HRA. Of course, there's safeguards in there, right? We would put in place special inspections, and we talked a little bit about this in June. Is working with their families to educate them about special inspection process and making sure that they're working in partnership with their landlord to report repairs and be helping them work in partnership with their landlords. And so that where that time savings would be working with our tenants so that they knew how to be looking for things, reporting their maintenance, and then report it, give the landlord time to make the repairs. If they don't make the repairs, calling it in again and giving their landlord the time to get those repairs made. And then if not, talking to the housing authority about coming out to do this special inspection. Again, when we were working with our families and doing the outreach with them, I think the biggest sort of positive that families saw again was that time commitment is that they're not having to come take off work and it's a less burden. And then also families are very aware that it's hard to place their voucher, and they're very aware that it's hard to get landlords to want to work with the program. So seeing it as a benefit for landlords was something that we heard as well. The con that we heard very loud and clear, again, is sort of that fear of working with their landlord. So if they don't make the repairs and they call the HRA for a special inspection, fearful of that at some point maybe the landlord wouldn't re-sign their lease.
Excuse me, this question from Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, first of all, I would just like to say that I love the presentation listing the pros and the cons. It really does help us as we make our policy decision making, and if we could see that format or see how proposals are prioritized in that process, kind of high-level summaries, that's very helpful. So I know I had some questions when this came up before, and I'm glad that you mentioned that the tenants could request to have an inspection if they go through the process, and if they, if it's not too arduous, that that request would still be made, even though there is somewhat of a cost, and making sure that that's part of the program, and not just something that they can think about on their own, that they know that they can do that. And if there is an issue with them feeling like there's going to be some ramifications, maybe they could be referred to the booklet or whatever about their rights. And I'm sure you do that already. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to say thank you for formatting that way. That really helps.
Thank you. Councilmember Manto.
What are the other, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I'm gonna get this one of these days. What are the other authorities here in the metro region doing in this area?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, St. Paul and Minneapolis do biennial inspections, and they both have a different flavor. So one of the things we're talking about here is the top bullet is phase and implementation through qualifying criteria. So some housing authorities have it where I think St. Paul's is if the landlord the previous year passed their inspection by the second inspection and they had 5 or less fail items that were non-life threatening the year before, they get to skip a year. So having, some thresholds, and that's what we are thinking, that rather than going all completely biennial, which is why the savings is only 3,000 inspections a year, because it depends how you do this. To go straight biennial, I don't think is something we would recommend. There's some landlords that will need to inspect every year, so having some qualifying criteria. And they're doing it on a small scale. Same with Minneapolis is doing a similar thing. So and the criteria we have in place, I think, are too restrictive. So how many did we do last year?
925.
So 925 last year we did, but we think we can expand that by loosening our criteria and still making sure that our families live in safe units. And I'm going off on a tangent. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
It's getting late.
Chair. You were on point. Quick one question I wonder about is what can we quantify what the cost savings is to us for this? Because that would be really that's a great data point to have to that as well, and just an affirmation of I think that threshold makes sense. I also wonder about the opportunity for that complaint. I think it also makes sense to have a complaint system or and I think of both and ask for help and complaint, because sometimes you can get ahead of things if it's clear how someone can ask for help without it being what's the word I'm looking for, without penalizing them, without fear of punitive. Thank you, sir. Punitive, without being punitive.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas and Ingebrigtsen, we do special inspections now. We just anticipate we would have more. Someone doesn't have any heat in the middle of the winter and the landlord's not fixing it, we are going to send an inspector out. So we do some of that now. So we have a process in place. I think we'll just more formalize it and make it tenant friendly and
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Did you say what the qualifying criteria were already?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, no. We don't, and our written policy will not dig into that. That will be more of a procedure. But I think one of the things we're thinking about doing in practice is adopting something like St. Paul has to make sure. So incentivizing it for landlords, I think we have that on this slide, but incentivizing landlords to want to pass on the first or second attempt for the inspection and have limited number of fail items. Then they get to skip a year next year. So we think that would be a really good tool. That would mean we're picking good landlords that generally take care of their units to receive the benefit. So we'll probably have some sort of a hybrid approach to how we do this, but the idea is we want to expand where we are today.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
It just dawned on me. We've had a couple of incidences with children falling out of windows in the metro area. Would that be on that category of a life-threatening? You said non-life-threatening, but on that list of life-threatening things is checking for secured screens and windows one of those things?
Ms. Smith.
So do you want to answer this one?
I know this is getting into the weeds, but I just,
kind of,
sorry.
She knows the requirements of that.
Ms. Keel.
And I do.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Council Member, when we are going in from a health and safety, there's windows, right? There's requirements that we're looking at for windows. If a window is designed to open, it must be openable. It must be locking. If it's at a certain level, right? It must be locking. We also have requirements about what can be used to hold a window up. I think of like old homes. I know a house I lived in Minneapolis, we used a wine bottle to hold the window up. That would not pass HQS, by the way.
Was it empty or full?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Always empty.
It's 7 o'clock.
Yeah, right. But there's definite things that HUD requires from a safety standpoint. I think about railings, right? They have to be so many inches apart because of that very thing on balconies and things like that. If a patio door, we're looking at the locking mechanisms for that as well. So those are all required by HUD.
Thank you. No further questions. Ms. Smith.
We're coming to the end. Now this is the timeline. You're walking through this?
Sure, I can do that, absolutely. Can anybody see this slide without a magnifying glass? So we did this timeline with you all in June, but just sort of where we're at is we're always, the engagement with stakeholders ongoing. We drafted the administrative plan, and we're continuously always looking at policy. We established that public hearing date in June. We've been open for our public comment period, and we will be for 45 days. We were holding our community meetings in July. The public hearing will be August 19th at 6 p.m. here in this building. On September 16th, we will be coming back to you for approval. So really tonight was this opportunity to dig in and give you some of this information so that you weren't hearing it for the first time when we said, and can you approve this or not approve something? So we're really trying to be intentional in how we have conversation with you. And so you will see us back here on August 19th, but then again on September 16th. And then it goes to full council on September 25th. So whatever iteration of policy we come up with, you will see on that September 16th date.
And we want to engage with you through this process. So if you have questions offline, contact us. If you don't understand something, if you want more clarification, we'd rather have those conversations with you up front and resolve any issues or concerns or answer questions. At any point, we can be helpful to you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Keogh, thanks very much for your work on this and for the presentation. Further discussion, Councilmember Cummings.
No, just a comment. I mean, tonight's all the things that you brought up, very heavy, very big, very complicated, and thank you. I mean, we, I think, realize there are no easy answers, and being able to be a part of the discussion and hopefully moving this forward, but thank you for all of your effort, because it's huge and so important. It's people's lives. Thank you.
Agree. Thank you. Thanks. Council members, anything? Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you too. So seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.